Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of MormonStories podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is March 23rd, 2022, and we are here in studio for 2 full days with Stephen Pynakker, a name that many of you won't know yet, but you will soon. Stephen Pynakker is the host of a podcast and YouTube channel called Mormon Book Reviews, and we just spent a good hour and a half hearing about how someone raised in Chicagoland area as an evangelical Christian.
Charismatic.
Mm-hmm. Is evangelical not the right word?
No, evangelical is a broad enough term. I think that makes it work. Yeah.
Why would a charismatic Christian raised in the 70s and 80s in Chicagoland become so obsessed with Mormonism that he's read 10 times the Mormon books that I have and knows more than me, Gerardo, and Jenn combined, and is I think is one of the most knowledgeable people alive on Mormon history. Gerardo, is that fair to say?
Probably.
Yeah. Hope you're not embarrassed by that claim.
I know there are people who know a lot about Mormonism, and it's very weird to hear you of all people say that, but it was weird once I started talking to people. I didn't know how much I knew until I started talking to people, and I realized, I know a lot. So I thank you for the kind words.
Yeah. Well, you've earned it. And so what we're going to do in this part 2 of our, 5-6 part series with you, this is going to probably even freak you out a little bit more. For me, this opportunity right now, this episode, is as significant as the Michael Coe interview and as the Robert Ridner interview in this sense. How often do we get a real, I don't want to say scholar, Stephen, because you haven't published, but in terms of somebody that is like really done the work to learn and think about deeply these issues, who is external, has never been Mormon, and has no axe to grind per se, and who actually loves the restoration tradition. And even in the last episode, has a real love for Joseph Smith and definitely a love for Mormons and Mormonism. Like, how often do we get someone who is willing for political reasons, and when I say political reasons, I mean socially political reasons, who isn't concerned about what will the MHA crowd think, or what will my buddies in the Mormon studies crowd think, or how might this affect my ability to win some award at some conference, who can just honestly give a candid assessment of the history independently with as much depth as Stephen can. So from that perspective, I don't know that we'll ever get a more knowledgeable never Mormon to opine on the question of how the Book of Mormon was created. And that's what I want to do for this part 2. If there are others of you out there, if there are other never Mormons out there that want to compete with Stephen for the title of the sort of like most knowledgeable never Mormon to give their theory on how the Book of Mormon was created, I'm opening up that invitation right now. Automatic interview. You're in. I want to hear you give your own opinion, but this may be the best chance we ever get at an outsider's view of how the Book of Mormon was created. Gerardo, do you validate that buildup?
I love it. Yep. Yeah.
That's why you wanted to do this interview, right? Or at least one of the reasons.
Yeah. The Book of Mormon is very important for a lot of people, right? And for Mormons, even people questioning their faith. A lot of the times, that's what holds a lot of people in the church, because the Book of Mormon, they still believe in it. It's really hard to get past it. So, I mean, like Jeffrey Holland said, you have to crawl around it.
Under, over, or around it. You have to crawl under, over, around it. No, but Gordon B. Hinckley said it's the keystone of our religion.
Right.
That either, Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon are everything they claim to be, or it's the biggest fraud ever perpetrated. Like, that's Mormon church leaders that have kind of created that expectation or dichotomy.
Yeah.
And I think it's true. Even Richard Bushman would agree that if the Book of Mormon isn't what it claims to be, the church isn't true. And even the point of this episode isn't to prove the Mormon church false.
Right.
And I know that you, Stephen, wouldn't want to like stray into that category. It's just when you were, so we'll start it out this way. we talked about how you were raised as a charismatic Christian, but then at some point you lost your faith in Christianity and became, as you would have described it, an atheist or an agnostic. And then during that time, you did it, 10, 20 years of deep study of Mormonism. So this would have been your secular explanation of the creation of the Book of Mormonism as you would have assembled it prior to you regaining faith in Christianity.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I think you undersold it. I'm just joking. I think I want to appreciate the kind words, but I just also, I've read a lot of papers. I've read a lot of books. So, I mean, a lot of what I'm doing is kind of just taking from other people's research, but also in my mind, trying to think of different ways that I think that Joseph, in a naturalistic explanation. So I wear different hats. So sometimes I wear a supernatural hat, a believer's hat, and other times I wear a skeptic's hat. And I think that's the best way to pursue things. Like even with me, like with what I think, like when we finished part one, how I said, I believe we have a divine appointment, right? Or the God. There's also that secular part of me that could says, well, Steve, there's other reasons that we're brought here that could be easily naturalistically explained, right? So I acknowledge that. So I just want to say that's how I think. So this is not a bashing of the Book of Mormon or anything like that. It's just like, okay, if I'm purely secular, I'm an anthropologist or whatever, and I'm trying to study religion from the outside, how does this religion come into being, right? And how does a book like the scripture, like the Book of Mormon, come to being? So just want to get that out of the way.
All right. Okay, so I want to kind of follow a timeline, and I definitely think we need to understand or hear from you about Joseph Smith's family of origin and kind of the treasure digging stuff. Mm-hmm. How could we explain the Book of Mormon without talking about those two things? Yep. But even prior to that, there's the creation of the Bible, right, and the Mound Builder myth, right, that would have predated Joseph's own parents. Yeah. So where do you want to begin in the history of civilization to begin your explanation of how the Book of Mormon came to be?
Well, I mean, I guess we could start with, it counts for something that Joseph Smith comes from Pilgrim stock and not Puritan stock. The Puritans were more about getting the doctrine right, and the Pilgrims are much more experimental and innovative in how they view their Christianity. So that is kind of the world that's the tradition that Joseph came out of. And so it was less doctrinaire and it was more experimental. And we need to understand that leading up to Joseph Smith, the idea of modern prophets in our times was ideas that predate Joseph by hundreds of years, that these were ideas that were in this world all along. And so that's significant, right? So like a Calvinist would say, the reason why he strayed is that he was not grounded in solid biblical doctrine, right? Because of where he came from. And so there's a few other things too, like one of the things I like to talk about, how within rural communities in general, you would have, of course, we all know about this magical worldview, right? The idea that superstition and that there's spirits and all these things, this is all part of that world. And you could be a Christian and also believe these things as well. And I always tell people, my grandfather was raised in the prairies of Canada in the 1920s, so about 100 years after Joseph Smith. It was the frontier, and it was a very similar world that Joseph grew up in. And they were, even though they were doctrinaire Calvinist Christians, they still had superstitious practices. They used dowsing rods. They used the astrological calendars for planting. And so within a rural Christian context, this magical worldview made it well into the 20th century. Okay, so I think it's important that we establish that the Pilgrim stock, the idea that there could be new modern prophets, modern revelation, were all there. And then we can't forget about also the Woodscrape incident, where Joseph Smith's father, Joseph Smith Sr., and I believe Oliver Cowdery's father may have been involved in a group that believed in temple rituals as well as an ancient setting for Indians and stuff. So this is even within the family lore of an ancient kind of a mystical like a tying in of ancient American Indians with having like a history of them. So this was even before Joseph was born. That was part of the family.
I don't think my listeners will know the basics of the Woodscrape, even just the high level basics of the Woodscrape incident.
It was kind of like, well, I know you had on Kimball's relative. She has no, remember she had a Greek last name. She wrote that book.
Kathleen Melanakis.
Yes, about the early. That's another book I bought that from your show, and she kind of gives a very interesting idea that, and I don't buy into it entirely, but she talks about how basically you had these counterfeit rings that were going on, and it involved taking oaths and making secret oaths with each other, and counterfeiting. And kind of having a cover story for your counterfeiting operation. So they kind of, and I'm trying to remember the exact story about the Woodscrape incident because it's fascinating. Because it's only mentioned briefly in the Burned Over District book that came out, and I forget who wrote that, but it was like in the 1960s. So there isn't a whole lot out there about it, but there's a lot of speculation. But it had to tie in with ancient American Indians and temple rituals and oaths. That's the best from the top of my memory that's there. But that seems to be, predates Joseph. And obviously there's some familiar sounding things there, right? That we're hearing, before Joseph is even born. And then we also have actually an incident of a relative in Michigan of Joseph's finding a lost hidden document that was a counterfeit in that proclaimed said that it was of an ancient lineage as well. So you kind of see things coming together, and then of course we have the Mound Builder myth, which was what many mainstream Christians believed at the time as well. So this is just there's so much going on already that can almost kind of prefigures or can kind of almost anticipate the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. And
it's almost ingredients in the soup,
it's all ingredients.
So talk about the Mound Builder myth and how it would have been an important setting or context or ingredient in the soup.
Right. I mean, probably a lot of you already kind of know the story, but let's just kind of give like a brief idea about it. So the idea is that how did these people get to the New World? The Bible doesn't talk about them.
Meaning the Native Americans.
Native Americans.
Yeah.
Right. And this very much perplexed people because you have the known world and the Bible doesn't acknowledge that there's another world. As a matter of fact, it hardly acknowledges anything outside of the Roman Empire, really. Within a New Testament context and just the Middle East and bits and pieces in the Old Testament. So the world was much smaller in the Bible, right? So when you find this, you go to the New World and you find these peoples, you have to come up with an explanation. And so we have the story of the 10 lost tribes being taken into captivity, right? And then they're lost to history. So it's a story that, the Bible is like, it almost is asking for an explanation as to what happened to these people, right? So then you have like a lot of theories, like the British-Israeli. This came a little later, but the idea that that the Europeans were the 10 lost tribes of Israel. This would be a little after Joseph's time. But then when they came to the New World, they started encountering these civilizations, these mounds, and they also started encountering the Native Americans who were not building these mounds. At least, actually, Dan Vogel tells us that Thomas Jefferson witnessed firsthand them burying bodies in mounds, even in his time. So apparently they were still some were at least still being used. But the general idea was that these were remnants of a lost civilization. Mm-hmm. And the idea that these people, the natives, the Indians as they would call them, had anything to do with this just didn't seem like that would make any sense. It just didn't jive with them. So they just assumed that it had to be an advanced civilization that built those mounds.
Wasn't it at least partly there was some guilt and shame that they were killing and displacing Native Americans, and you can't respect and love and admire people that you're potentially committing genocide upon. And so you have to not, when you're seeing some beautiful civilization relics, you don't want to attribute great art and great civilization and great intellectual capacity to a bunch of people you're displacing and or killing. Isn't that there's a racist element to it?
There is, and there's also the fact is that if you have buildings, you have land and you have a land claim. So you have to separate them from those land claims, right? And so that's why they had to separate them from the story, from the narrative, because if you built structures, if you built buildings, you own property. That's a land claim, and within the Western mindset. So they had to separate them from that. It was an imperative. So then
and where does the white and dark skin in the Mound Builder myth come into play with the Lost 10 Tribes and that sort of deal?
Yeah. So I think that the idea is they looked at the Native Americans and they kind of had racist ideas about people with darker skin, aren't capable of building these civilizations. They felt the same about Africans and just about anybody that wasn't white. And so they were inferior. So if you separate the Native American population from the mounds, then you have a history that needs to be told, right? And you have a book that purports to tell the history of the world or the universe, right? And that's the Bible. So this was a society that was very much steeped in the knowledge of the Bible, and their history and everything was informed with a biblical worldview and a very literalistic view of the world, right? So everybody back then basically believed in a literal flood, that the earth was relatively young, and you have to account for people, where did they end up going and stuff like that. So you actually have two schools of thought here, right? So you have two lost civilizations you could talk about almost. Dispersal of the populations during the Tower of Babel, right? And the idea in that is that, people spread throughout the world.
Were people talking about that
absolutely.
idea about the Tower of Babel?
People talk about that in biblical literalist circles to this day. They believe that the Tower of Babel is literal history, and that all the languages come from that. There are people that believe this, right? To this day.
And I only bring that up because, and I'm not going to try to bash or even ask you to answer to them, but apologists try to say, when critics talk about the Mound Builder myth, they don't realize how it has nothing, that the 10 tribes has nothing to do with the Tower of Babel. So Tower of Babel and Jaredites are such an original idea that could have nothing to do with what people were talking about back then. But you're saying, no, actually Christians would have been thinking about Tower of Babel.
Absolutely.
This groups.
In the early 1800s, I think he's asking.
There's no doubt about it, because the Bible tells you that the peopling of the earth and the dispersal of the populations all happened as a result. So it only stands the reason that some of those people would have made their way to the New World. That would have been one explanation using the Bible, how they got there.
Because how else would languages have developed, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what I actually believed as a Mormon kid growing up, is we got languages as a result of the Tower of Babel.
Absolutely.
Jen's nodding.
I did too. I did too.
Yeah. Okay. So if I was learning this in the 1980s, certainly they were thinking about it in the 1820s.
Oh, absolutely. And I was taught this too.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So again, where does white skin come into the 10 Tribes Mound Builder myth? How would 18th or 19th century, Americans have brought in introduced white skin into the Mound Builder myth? What's the logical, where are the dots they would connect?
Well, I mean, we got to talk about a lot of the doctrines that were taught and were still taught in Southern churches up until the 1960s and are still taught in churches is the curse of Ham, right? Also, the idea that all the sons of Noah were the progenitors of the various races. And it's almost like it kind of, now this is actually not in the Bible. This is not really 19th century theory of like, where did people come from? Where did the races come from? And like that. And so it just appears that it becomes self-evident to Western white Christian people that they're at the pinnacle of civilization, right? So it only stands to reason that great civilizations are, for the most part, going to be built by white people. That's how they viewed it. But they also believed that was God's ordained, way it's supposed to go, right? Like that's kind of how he ordered things to be. That we as white people are at the pinnacle, we're at the top, therefore we have God's favor. And therefore, if there's great mighty civilizations to be built, it's going to be us. But also within the Christian context is this idea that if people turn wicked, their civilizations would collapse. And so the Old Testament is replete with these examples of God punishing the Israelis and the Hebrews and everything like that through outside, bad guys, evil people even, destroying them. So you have like a society that's has God's favor, and everybody looks around and they're all white and we have God's favor. So it only stands the reason the people that aren't white don't have God's favor and aren't capable of building the civilizations that white people can build. I just think that is so obvious to everybody at that time. That's how they saw the world.
Plus, they're literally slaveholders of Africans.
Yeah.
And cursed be Ham, you will be the slave of slaves. That's justification.
I have a question. So you mentioned that Europeans at that time, the Pilgrims, would believe that they were, as white people, they would be part of maybe the lost 10 tribes of Israel.
No, that would be a theory that developed later on. That was called British Israelism, and that would have been best known through Worldwide Church of God, that group that really promoted it. But that has a foundation. Plus, like white Aryan nation groups, they believe that kind of stuff too. In the modern 20th century, they believe that Europeans are the 10 lost tribes. That's the more likely explanation for the lost 10 tribes would have been more of that they found the lost 10 tribes, or that the civilization that built the mounds was the 10 lost tribes,
So basically, whenever the kingdom of David or what got divided, where the 2 tribes got abducted into slavery or whatever, and the 10 tribes, northern tribes, right?
The 10 northern tribes got abducted, and then you had the 2 southern tribes, were the only remaining. Like,
okay, sorry, I got that wrong.
That's the narrative of Judaism after that is the 2 southern kingdoms.
So around what year would the 10 tribes have been?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't give
1,000
you
years before Jesus or something.
I mean, something like that.
Okay, so they would have. Where did they go? And so the Mound Builder myth would have been that some of those people who were, I guess, were they thinking that Israelis would have been white?
Yeah,
pre-Jesus.
Yeah. Well, just look at all the paintings, all the art in Europe.
Now, but just would they have been? Like I'm asking you now, would Israelis back then have been white?
No, of course not.
I was just thinking, they would have been what?
Well, they would have been Middle Eastern. I mean, they would have been, like
modern Arabs, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we can look at, there are Jews that are very white complected as well, modern Judaism. But there would have probably been some that would have been lighter skin. But generally speaking, like they would have probably had dark hair. They wouldn't have had blonde hair. The Bible makes a note of one of King David's sons having blonde hair, and that he was the most fairest one of them, and his name escapes me, but either way. So it seemed to be like a rare thing, so it wouldn't have been like white people. It would have been basic Middle Eastern people for the most part.
Brown skin, dark eyes, black hair.
Yeah.
And Jesus would have fit that description.
Yeah.
But somehow, because it's white people trying to make sense of the world with the biblical worldview in the 17 and 1800s, then it's got to be white people. So the 10 tribes are white people. And somehow some of those 10 tribes made their way over to America. So would the Mound Builder myth have tried to speculate how the white 10 tribes, how some of them would have made it to America? Would they have even tried to speculate? Like, would it have been through boat? Would it have been through the Bering Strait? Like, had they thought that part through, the Mound Builder myth?
That's a very good question. I don't know if they developed. That's a very good question. I should look into that. But
I think few of the Hebrews had boats, right?
Yeah. So that would have been. Yeah, View of the Hebrews would have been an example of that. Yeah, and it's hard to say because I think that I imagine some would have thought of like a land bridge landing as well. I mean, I think that you could look at a map and see things connecting. I think some would have gone that direction as well. But yeah, and really this is the key thing, and this is what I think is important too, is that specifically at this time, the 10 lost tribes were thought to be the mound builders in the upper Midwest. They weren't taking them into account for Mesoamerica or any of the populations in the South. Essentially, the lost 10 tribes all landed in North America. That was the general consensus at the time. There wasn't a whole lot out there about the other stuff.
And people who believe the Mound Builder myth would have believed that they arrived in North America white, that they were basically Jewish, and that they would have built these amazing civilizations. But then some would have, somehow dark-skinned people would have Would the Mound Builder myth have had a theory about how the dark-skinned people emerged? Would they have come in through other means and just intermingled, or would there have been a cursing of skin?
No, there wouldn't have been a cursing of skin. I think the general idea is that they built this civilization, and maybe at a later time, a darker skinned group would have come in and wiped them out, which would be the Native Americans. I think that that would have been kind of like almost like a genocide. That would have been the thought then, these people here that they see, the Native Americans, they're the ones that killed the white people that built these. I think that would have been the general idea of how they would have seen things then. Yeah.
And what's your confidence level that like Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy and even Hiram and Joseph Smith would have had exposure to the Mound Builder myth as a way to inform whatever came later?
I mean, you have mounds all over the place. So stories are going to pop up about them, and speculation is going to pop up about them all the time. And so like they saw Cumorah, they thought that was an Indian mound. They didn't know what a drum line was, so yeah, that would have been so part of woven in. And we got books from the 1600s that talk about the 10 Lost Tribes and the mounds specifically. It was very much centered in the United States, very much within the 13 colonies. And, because a lot of those other civilizations weren't even known, like in Mesoamerica in the 1600s, there was very little knowledge about those things. So basically the idea of the 10 Lost Tribes springs forth directly from the mounds of North America. That's what makes it so unique. It's a story about those mounds built by those people.
Okay. All right. And then we've got, I guess when you think about who's the Campbellite? What was his name? The Sidney Rigdon was influenced by?
Alexander Campbell.
When you think about Alexander Campbell's first review of the Book of Mormon, do you remember what he said?
Yeah, it covers all the major disputations and everything of our society, and it gives us the origin of the Native Americans and answers all the theological questions of the time, yeah.
So to give someone just a brief history, so like to provide some more important context, and now I feel like I'm almost channeling Grant Palmer, but what would have been the religious or the Christian context that Joseph's parents and Joseph would have been swimming in that would have set some of the groundwork for the Book of Mormon to want to come forward?
Yeah, so...
You're just repeating what you just said, but maybe slowing down a tiny bit.
Yeah, so I think what's happening is, first of all, within American society, we're still a very young republic, and you have the rise of deism. You have the works of Thomas Paine, which kind of introduced, it's almost like a proto-atheism, right? Rising. So you have a real challenge to Christianity, right? That's going on in the Bible, the authority of the Bible, and all these kind of things. So these are kind of things that are happening. And then you also have all these questions that the Bible isn't answering. So people are like, how did these people? I mean, it was a very big time theological thing about these people who are here, and God has to give them an opportunity to hear the gospel. I mean, how could you isolate these people? And no way a Christian missionary could have made their way here until we got here. So it just called out for an explanation. And then at the same time, we're having what is called the Second Great Awakening, which is a response to deism and the undermining of the Bible. It's kind of saying like the reason why we fell off is that we got so rigid in we lost the spark of the Holy Spirit. We don't have the events that happen in the Bible going on anymore, and we've just made Christianity into these just very stoic religions. It's just very cold, and it's not participatory. It's becoming less relevant to people. People are not interested in going to church anymore because it's very boring, and you have just these challenges going on.
Don't forget the Catholic Church and views on the Catholicism, right?
Oh well,
which
course.
Also make their way to the Book of Mormon, right?
Yeah. So this was, of course, a very anti-Catholic country, still very Protestant. They would have been very anti-Papist, and the reason why they would have been is because all of them basically are, for the most part, I mean, within in the context we're talking about, they would have all been Protestants who probably would have affirmed that the Pope is the Antichrist at this time.
And that the Catholic Church is the whore of all the earth. Right?
Absolutely. They looked at those books in the Book of Revelation talking about the whore of Babylon, and most of them, and even the Reformers, thought that was the Catholic Church that was talking about. No doubt about it. Yep.
Yeah. So lots of, and about authority, about which church is true.
Yeah.
Right. And because you've got all these Protestant denominations, but they're battling with each other.
Yes.
Right. About authority, about baptism, about confirmation, about priesthood lineage.
Yes. And that's huge because in modern day Protestantism, we don't have that anymore. For the most part, you could just go down to any church and no problem.
Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist.
You might get a little ribbing from the family. Oh, now you're a Methodist, huh? But nobody would really bother you about it, right? So this is the thing. Like back then, it was really important which church you belonged to. So a Presbyterian would have said, well, if you get that Methodist baptism, you're going to hell. Like this is the kind of language that they were talking about at the time. So you had this really extreme sectarianism going on as well. And I think that's probably also what helped lead to the Second Great Awakening, because you had this recognition that this denominationalism is causing all these problems. And what we need to do is get back to the Church of Acts, to the first century, and restore the church back to its original purpose and foundation. That the church has become so corrupted, and that because of these sectarian battles that are going on, that we just need a clean slate, start all over again, and use the Book of Acts as our guide to build a church. And this is what the Second Great Awakening in many ways was all about. Let's get back to the Bible. Let's deeds, not creeds. That was one of their more popular things that they had. We need to get back to the Bible. We need to get back to the first century, and you need to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And this is where the revivalism comes in, and all these things, they come out of these Protestant denominations. Like you had the Stone Campbellite movement, so you had Barton Stone, you had Alexander Campbell. One was a Baptist minister, one was a Presbyterian minister. They both had the recognition that something was very wrong in the church, and that there needed to be a restoration. They used the term restoration in their language. So that's really the world. That's the world Joseph's in.
And I just want to repeat what you just said. Like you like to refer to kind of all the different branches of Mormonism as the restoration tradition.
Yep.
But the actual restoration tradition predates Joseph Smith as its own non-Mormon related strain or impulse, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And
so if you would have gone around in 1820, 1825 and mentioned restorationism or whatever, what would people have thought of?
I would have thought of that movement that was going on. I mean,
Campbell.
Yep, that would have been all right. And they were using the term restoration.
Well, I think the Seventh-day Adventists are really similar of the timeline.
Well, the Seventh-day Adventists come about in the 1840s.
A little later.
So they use all the 19th century sects that come out all use restorationist language.
Yeah.
And that predates, I just want to make sure it predates Mormonism. So keep
predates
going.
and postdates it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And that's important. I think that's really important because even when we were reading about D&C 132, just with Sandra Tanner, the justification in there is, well, we got to have a restoration of all things.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily coming from God or Joseph. That's the history. That's the context they're swimming in. Is that right?
It's the context of swimming, but see, Joseph takes it in a much different direction
because he means Old Testament too, right?
Yeah, he's like taking the restoration again. This is naturalistic explanation. He's taking and just running with things in such a unique, I'd say, ingenious way. I mean, the guy's a religious genius, and so the idea. I mean, we could get into the Masonry and all that kind of stuff too, because they were going to restore true Masonry, and that is in relation to the Book of Mormon as well. Yeah. So
But at the time Joseph is growing up, I think Masonry was being looked down.
Okay, that's the next place I was going to go.
Yeah, we could talk about that.
And so that's great. Grant Palmer, again, we're channeling Grant Palmer because so before we jump there, Gerardo. So we've just explained so far from the Book of Mormon, the Lamanite Nephite question, all the stuff about the blood of Israel and God's chosen people, all of that part of the Book of Mormon we've just explained. We've just explained the light and the dark skin. We've just explained why the light skinned people get killed off in the end. We just explained the Tower of Babel, which explains the Jaredites, right? Mm-hmm. And we just talked about restorationism and sectarianism. and this is again channeling Grant Palmer, we're now explaining a lot of why are there Protestant sermons appearing in the Book of Mormon that are supposed to be predating even the birth of Jesus Christ. And yet you've got Protestant sermons in the Book of Mormon that are talking about things like infant baptism and authority and like Grant Palmer would have been the first to call my attention to the idea that Joseph Smith was hearing these sermons in the Burnt Over district and sort of bringing that type of theology into the Book of Mormon. Is that?
Yeah. So I would say that I think, first of all, and again, I have got great friends who are faithful Mormons, and I'm just talking as a man, if you will, just kind of, I think that not only was Joseph hearing the sermons, I also think that he was engaging Jonathan Edwards in particular. Now, many of the people who were giving sermons were also parroting Jonathan Edwards, but a lot of so my friend Jonathan Neville wrote the book, Jonathan Edwards, Infinite Goodness, Joseph Smith, Jonathan Edwards in the Book of Mormon. And Jonathan Neville, who you should have on, is a Orthodox, true blue Mormon, and he did a Google search of the words that are in the Book of Mormon that are not in the Bible. And he's just a layperson. He's a lawyer by training. But he does this word analysis and discovers that there are so many phrases and words that are not in the Bible, but are in the Book of Mormon. And he kept on coming back to Jonathan Edwards in particular. Now, Jonathan Edwards was a very famous 18th century theologian, pastor. The Sinners in the Hands of the Angry God was like the most popular, the most important sermons ever given in this country. That's what he's best known for, right? So he on his own came across this phraseology. The natural man is an enemy to God is not in the Bible, but Jonathan Edwards uses that phrase. Okay? So I think Jonathan Edwards plays an outsized influence in the formation of the Book of Mormon. Now, this is the thing. If Joseph Smith is a conventional translator, that's fine, right? If it's showing up on the seer stone, maybe that's a little bit of an issue, right? But if he's using modern 19th century understanding and language while he's translating the plates, in other words, you can be a faithful Mormon and still accept Jonathan Edwards in there. But if you're a naturalist, you're saying, well, it's obvious he's just parroting, Jonathan Edwards' stuff.
And we know for a fact that Joseph is really good at borrowing other preachers, other theologians' ideas and incorporating them into his own theology. We know that because of his translation of the Bible, where he's using almost exact concepts as Adam Clark.
Yep.
In the Joseph Smith translation,
right?
At JST,
yeah.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
We know that he is capable of doing that. And this is the thing.
Not capable, skilled at.
So another thing, I just had John Hamer on, and we're doing a 3-part series about the early history of the church. And one of the things he brought up, and this is where he said, as evangelical Protestants, you should really take the Book of Mormon very seriously. Because it actually has this unique thing that it actually has transcribed 19th century revival sermons, which weren't transcribed because they were just speaking from the heart. And you actually have a historical record of 19th century sermons in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
So that's what I find so fascinating.
That's
too.
very cool.
It's like he actually is like having a recording. Like I had my mom read King Benjamin's sermon the other day. I told my mom, I said, your mother would have loved King Benjamin's sermon because she would have agreed with so much of the doctrine and what he taught in there.
Yeah.
And so that to me, that's what actually makes the Book of Mormon accessible to evangelicals and Protestants as well, in that regard. So it is part of our heritage in one sense as well.
Yeah. Okay, 2 more things. So Gerardo mentioned the fascination with the Masons and the Morgan affair.
Yes.
Which Grant Palmer wanted to sort of tie, and probably he probably got this idea from someone else, but all the secret combinations fascination in the Book of Mormon, he wants to tie that to the fascination with the Masons at the time.
Yeah.
Do you see a connection there? And if so, do you want to explain it?
Yeah, because I think, first of all, Western New York was ground zero for the anti-Mason party, right? And at this time, people don't realize the anti-Mason party was like a huge successful party, elected members to Congress and to the governorships. I mean, it was a force to be reckoned with. And this is all in response to a gentleman who wrote an expose on secret temple ceremonies that the Masons were doing, named William Morgan. And allegedly his body was tossed in the Lake Ontario and it was recovered. And the idea is that they take these vows in the temple that if you divulge what goes on here, that the penalty is death, right? And so it was understood then that, okay, this is real. They will kill you. And we have politicians and governors and judges that have taken these oaths. And if they all have taken a vow to support each other and to not go against the other because they took these oaths, then you can't get a fair trial if you have a Masonic judge. Andrew Jackson was a Mason, so that's also fueled a lot of what was going on. So this was a very much a big explosive movement that was happening, and it really shook up the political world for a period of time there. And all the basically like 90% of the lodges shut down. It devastated Masonry. And the idea is that you have these groups of people taking secret oaths and establishing, and they use the term secret combinations as a term that was used to describe Freemasonry. And of course, this is phraseology that's very familiar to readers of the Book of Mormon. And there have been some speculation that Mormon was named after William Morgan, right? That there was that's where the name Mormon comes from. That was an influence on Joseph. Mormon's named after William Morgan. So yeah, it's like as an outsider, and you're looking at the history of the Jacksonian world, and you're familiar with all this stuff that's going on, and then all of a sudden you have things that would be descriptive of aspects of Masonry making itself into the Book of Mormon. And we even have later where, Cain slew Abel and he says, I'm Master Mahon, as in Master Mason, it rhymes with that. So, and it all seems like even just like the term Master Mahon, it implies by the author, if you will, that there was that was the original term was Mahon, but then it gets, I'm trying to think of the word, corrupted into a different word, Mason, right? It's almost like, so we got to restore a lot of the original lingo and all this kind of stuff. So the Book of Mormon, when it was first published, was referred to as the anti-Masonic Bible. So yeah, if you read it then and you were reading the script, you would say, oh yeah, okay, I get this. Like they would understand what was being said there. And this is the other thing that people need to understand, that people believed, and Masons believed, the narrative that Masons taught, that they can trace their lineage all the way to the building of King Solomon's temple, that it's a alternative history, a secret history of mankind. They believed it to be true, right? So these ideas that they were talking about, these were held that our roots go all the way back to Solomon. So we have this unbroken line of these secret people passing along this secret knowledge up into the 19th century. And this is what was believed by Masons at that time as well.
Love it. Okay, we have a couple more influences. So we also have Joseph Smith's own family dynamics, including his father, and again, this is from Grant Palmer, as a significant influence. Do you want to talk about that really quick?
Yeah. So first of all, Joseph Smith Sr. kind of was, he was his own man, right? And so he didn't really like the idea of belonging to a church or anything like that. And he would have categorized himself as a deist, right? But he was also a man that was a spiritual man, right? So he believed in dreams and visions and stuff like that. And so he was a big influence on Joseph. Now, the argument goes is that Joseph was kind of making the Book of Mormon for his father, to convert his father. And his father would have considered himself at the time as a universalist as well. And so, yeah, Joseph Smith Sr. is very...
What would a universalist believe?
Basically, universalists believe that basically everybody goes to heaven. Yeah, yeah. And
so no need of baptism, no need of following commandments. Right. You're just going to make it.
Yeah, yeah. And that was, so you had ideas like deism, Unitarianism, and Universalism that were counter to traditional biblical Christianity at the time, counter narratives. So, yeah, I mean, Joseph Smith Sr., and this is the whole point too, is when you bring that in, because he had a dream that was similar to what would become Lehi's vision as well. And
also the family structure a little bit.
Yeah,
right?
Well, yeah, and that's pretty well established that there's a family dynamic within the Book of Mormon that parallels the family dynamic within Joseph's world as well.
Older brothers.
Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, I'm sure
visionary father.
I'm sure he's thinking of William Smith when he's talking about Nephi's older brothers sometimes, right? I mean, I just think that again, this is, if he's the sole author of this book and these are the influences, I think that you can find these parallels within his family. It's rather obvious that's, to me, if you're looking at purely naturalistically, that one could make that argument that, yeah, he's definitely paralleling his family, his father, the structure, that Lehi is his father, is Joseph Smith Sr., and Joseph Smith Jr. is Nephi. I think you can make that argument, yes.
Again, down to the fact that the dream that we have on record that Joseph Smith Sr. had is in some ways very similar to Lehi's. In some ways almost identical to Lehi's dream in the Book of Mormon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, a couple more influences. Then we've got just the King James version of the Bible that Joseph Smith had in his possession appearing as Isaiah all throughout the Book of Mormon, potentially just directly copied. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, the general consensus is that he had access to a 1769 King James Bible and that he was parroting and taking stuff from that. I also think that a lot of the King James language that he would have been using also would have been via the sermons that he was hearing as well. And I think that Joseph had the ability to memorize large portions of Scripture. And so I think that I think he just, like they say, he was a sponge, right? So he's taken a lot of things. But I think you could say 1769 King James Bible, but also the sermons that are just full of these same King James Version language as well. Those would be the two. I sometimes think it almost was more the influence of the preachers than it was the text of the King James Version in some ways.
But aren't there errors from that version of the King James?
Right. And that is true. So I do think that there is.
Say what those are, like an example.
Oh, well, there was one example. Oh, darn it. I wish I could think
of it. Is it the italics or is it the actual?
Well, first of all, yeah. So he took, like, there would be helps that would be in there and he would remove those or he would like integrate those in such a way. Yeah. So he would definitely, some things would make their way into the Book of Mormon that shouldn't have made their way in, that they were modern, make it, from the King James Version and stuff like that. So yeah, there's, to most people's minds, there's very little doubt that 1769 King James Version played a major role in it.
How about Deutero
Isaiah? Right. So, there could have been up to 6 authors of Isaiah. So I think generally 5, but some people even think there might have been 6 or 7. This is the scholarly consensus, right? And so, but we also are told in the Book of Mormon narrative that they had access to, of course, they get the plates of Laban that has everything written down, and this is really important. And it includes Isaiah in there. But the problem is that if you subscribe to the Deutero-Isaiah theory, that there were multiple authors of the book of Isaiah, and it wasn't just Isaiah who lived in a particular place and time before these events, but there were later additions to Isaiah much later that were added in, but then they make their way into the Book of Mormon.
As if, because Rodney Meldrum tried to say that it was Jesus, maybe when Jesus came, he gave them those verses or those chapters, and that's how they ended up in the Book of Mormon. But I made a comment, and I don't know he understood what I was trying to say, but the problem is that we have Nephi quoting Isaiah and saying, this is coming from the plates of Laban, right?
Yeah.
But the stuff Nephi's quoting would have been written after Lehi left Jerusalem. Right. So there's no way they would have been contained in the brass plates. But is that right?
This is the thing. Though, that is if you accept the Deutero-Isaiah, because not all biblical scholars accept that. I tend to think that that's probably the correct thing. But let's just give some credence. There are so just so you know, one argument in favor of the Book of Mormon to literalist Christians is that it actually helps support the Bible. and that there would have been one Isaiah. So I say, like, so that's the thing, is that the Book of Mormon, as we were getting to all the different influences, is a defense of the Bible.
Yeah.
And without him knowing at the time, if he's the author, that the Book of Mormon can offer, and B.H. Roberts brought this up, is that, well, we can make the argument that the Book of Mormon bolsters the Bible because of this Isaiah thing, right?
Yeah.
But I want to acknowledge that there are born-again Christians who believe in the Bible, who believe that Isaiah just wrote it, and so it would have been perfectly fine then that they would have had all of Isaiah with them.
That's fine. We don't have to make the
Yeah, we don't have to,
arguments.
yeah.
We've had plenty of that. So one other really important influence that I just had an awakening of listening to Thomas Murphy, I think, on your program,
Yep.
is one area where Thomas Murphy and maybe Rod Meldrum agree, is that the Book of Mormon describes very well actual Native Americans that existed.
Yes.
The two problems are it's not Mesoamerican Native Americans,
Right.
and it's not any Native Americans that existed during the Book of Mormon time period.
Yep.
Do you want to fill in the blank of which Native Americans the Book of Mormon actually accurately describes?
Yeah, so Thomas Murphy said that I believe that the Heartland model is the most accurate description of the Book of Mormon. It's just that I believe it took place in the 19th century, and not
Meaning what?
Meaning that
As Joseph Smith's describing
yeah,
Lamanites.
he's describing stories about Native Americans that were known at the time, that make their way into the Book of Mormon. He has characters, Indian chiefs, that actually are very similar to characters in the Book of Mormon. He has the idea, there was a very well-known ceremony where the Iroquois buried their weapons. And then the other thing that Thomas Murphy talks about, and then again, he revealed this for the first time on my program. This is original research, which will be published soon. He said that the Nephites were neophytes. And what were neophytes? Neophytes was a term that was used for recent converts to Christianity, in particular Native American Indians, right? That's what they used. They called them neophytes. So even the term Nephite might have its roots in the term neophyte. So, yeah, and then, I mean, I'm trying to remember which king. I think he might have paralleled one of the kings in the Book of Mormon with a well-known chief, like in the 17th.
Maybe, I don't know. King Lamoni?
Maybe, yeah. I'm trying to remember which one he referenced, but he's done. You know, this is the thing is like, so, you know, one of the things that I say is that if the Book of Mormon is a product of Joseph Smith, I don't think, now Dan Vogel would disagree with me on this vehemently, and he'll let me know because Dan Vogel will let you know. Dan thinks that Joseph Smith had in mind a hemispheric model of the Book of Mormon. Land northward, land southward, narrow neck of line, and looked at it from a geographically. Honestly, I think the argument could be made, and I think Thomas Murphy is of this mind as well, is that you can have all the Book of Mormon events take place in Joseph Smith's backyard. And I think that it kind of like Jeremy Runnels kind of created a map of Western New York with a lot of Book of Mormon place names that.
I think he got that from someone else.
Yeah. I think he did. Well, he may have, but I also will tell you what's interesting to me is that there was a faithful Mormon named Phyllis Olive, who I think predates the CES letter. And she wrote a book, a limited geography model of the Heartland model. And she advocates in the faithful telling that all the events of the Book of Mormon took place in Western upstate, in Western New York. And she uses the same place names and stuff. In others came to similar conclusions that Jeremy Runnels, whatever work he was doing with the CES letter, a faithful Mormon also created a map of the Book of Mormon, a limited geography model that all takes place in Western New York. And I think that, you know, and Gerardo and I were talking about this, is that one could argue that Joseph Smith was world building, and he was doing it for many, many years before the Book of Mormon was written. I think that one could say that, first of all, we know that he was quite the storyteller, and that it was as though he lived among them, right? Is what his mother said. It was like he was one of them. He knew their manner of wars and speech and religious customs and everything like that. And I think that you could say that you have the treasure digging Joseph Smith.
We'll get there.
Okay. No, I'm not. I'm saying that when I say treasure digging, I'm merely speaking about him roaming the land. And I can imagine that you would have a situation where you have this guy where they're walking by mounds and he's telling stories about those mounds. And he talks about these battles that happen here and this battle happened there and this all happened. And
Like
so
he did with Zelph basically later, right? When he sees Zelph the white Labanite. It's like, oh, that's
right.
That's so-and-so from this story, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, that's the argument you could make, that he's doing the same thing and he's actually literally mapping out the story of the Book of Mormon in his own backyard.
In his mind, like Minecraft, you said.
Right. Well, and this is the thing. If he's doing that, see, one of the strongest arguments in favor of the Book of Mormon is that how do you take into account the complexity of the troop movements and the movements within, like, there's this like sophisticated complexity to the Book of Mormon.
The geography and
how do you keep
the
it
amount
straight?
of time of people moving from one place to another.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, well, you don't have television. You don't have all these other things, but you've got somebody, was known to have a vivid imagination. And I think he's telling this story during his youth. He's building this world in his mind. Maybe the names change, but he has a story for that mound over there. He has a story for that plain over there, a battle that took place there. And he's developing this story, and it's all taking place in the geography of his own backyard. So when you're creating the document of the Book of Mormon, he's able to keep track of everything because it's like he knows that world. He's lived in that world because he created that world.
And the coming back to the point I think I was trying to make that I got from Thomas Murphy is, tell me if I'm wrong, as he's describing Lamanites in the Book of Mormon, what livestock they have, what food they're eating, their behaviors, isn't he describing, like, why are there horses? Why are there pigs? Why are there wheat? Why is there barley? In the Book of Mormon, all the anachronisms, isn't he literally describing the Native Americans that he's seeing all around him in upstate New York?
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
Well, that's the argument. And that's why I'm saying, like, if you're going to come up with a naturalistic explanation, I think that the most logical one is that it all took place in Joseph's backyard, and he was able to come up with this entire story based on the world that he knew, the stories that he heard on the campfire, the stories that he told at the campfire, and told his other people. And he's just got this amazing capacity to remember things, and he's creating this cinematic masterpiece in his mind. He's got this movie, this great story. It really is, I mean, a great story in one sense, right? That he's created, and it's just waiting for the time where it needs to be put down onto paper.
And I learned from Fawn Brody that his maternal grandfather had written a book, his mom had written a book, that, like, book writing, he was a third generation author of a book. I think that's important to mention. And not a lot of his contemporaries were writing books, but his grandpa wrote a book, his mom wrote a book. And then tell me if I'm also, if this is, have you studied at all the Book of Napoleon or the Late War?
Yeah, the Late War.
Because there have been recent theories to explain kind of the language of the Book of Mormon, where what might have influenced that.
Yeah, so I think that when you see the Late War, it was an attempt,
which is a book, right?
It was a book that was written by a 14-year-old boy who wanted to write the history of the War of 1812, but written it in a sense of a biblical story, making it sound like scripture. And so there was a word analysis study that was done that showed that it says it's the most similar book to the Book of Mormon because it uses the King James language, because back then scripture had to sound like the King James. That was the sound of scripture. So I mean, some people have said that this was a popular enough book that it could have made its way into Joseph Smith's hands and it could have influenced him. And I think that's possible, but I also think that he may have never even heard of it, and that was just been the milieu that was in that a lot of people would have understood the Book of Mormon. I mean, this has to sound like scripture, right? And so that it could have just been a similar parallel that was going on. Whether it influenced him or not, I'm agnostic on, but I definitely think it shows how something could be created like that.
King James English being used in a 19th century original text.
Right.
By a 14-year-old, you said?
Yeah, I believe the Late War was written by a 14-year-old. Yeah, so it was kind of like it's kind of interesting to see. I'm almost positive he was 14, yeah. But so you have this idea of writing it this way, but also it parallels the Book of Mormon in this context, is that you got this kid writing scripture of a 19th century event, giving it a feel of something that happened in the Bible. And then you also have somebody potentially doing the same thing with 19th century America, upstate New York, Native Americans, mounds. You can see how they're telling a similar story, maybe changing the names and making it sound like it took place at a different time or place or whatever, like what Joseph did. But yeah, I mean, definitely there's a parallel there that needs to be further investigated. I think it's an interesting idea.
And so you just used the word parallel. That word was coming to my mind as well, because I am not a fan of parallelism, which is what many modern Mormon apologists do, which is find some 3 letters, NHM or whatever, and then go to somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula and find a match and say, look, this proves that Lehi would have stopped and built an altar. That's parallelism, and that's not a good thing. I don't want to be doing that here. And having said that, to summarize kind of the contextual discussion of the context that may have produced the Book of Mormon, what I think we just explained were many of the major influences of, in other words, some people want to make the argument that the Book of Mormon is such a miracle, like there's no way it could have been authored by Joseph Smith. But once you understand the contextual influences that likely influence the creation of the Book of Mormon, which include the Bible, Old and New Testament, the Mound Builder Myth, right? Joseph's own, Lehi and Joseph's own family narrative, all the Protestant sermons, the Masonic rhetoric that was going on, right? And the understanding of Native Americans living in upstate New York at the time, along with upstate New York geography. There are many people that say the Book of Mormon, plus Joseph's gift for storytelling and for remembering things, the Book of Mormon actually is the exact book you would expect to come out of 1830s, the mind of an 1830 gifted storyteller who had access to all these things.
Yeah. And
is that?
I think, yeah. I mean, that's a pretty. I think that's a very compelling argument one could make. Absolutely. But I also will say that if I just want to give a counter idea, and I think because I think it's also interesting is that if the items are appearing on the stone, and it's a word for word, right? That. It kind of undermines that theory if we're talking about that, right? Because the scholars would have us believe that we have to believe that there's these words that magically appeared on the stone, and that's how we got scripture, and that's what the outside world is supposed to accept. If we take Joseph Smith as translator, let's just say, because this is what I believe there were plates.
Well, we're getting there. Let's not jump ahead.
Okay, but as translator, let's just talk about the translator as a translator. He's going to take, like any other biblical translator, he is going to take all the influences of his world and integrate it into scripture. So biblical scripture is written by people that were influenced and products of their time. But so it's going to be part of that whole thing. So it doesn't, in other words, when you're translating from another language, you're going to be thinking in your world. That's just the only argument.
Okay.
In other words, in favor of a translation process that would include.
Well, this is a secular explanation.
Right. It is a secular, but I like to think on different levels too. I just find that I think it adds to the conversation.
Okay. So do we cover the main contextual or cultural influences that you think likely influenced the Book of Mormon?
Yeah. And I think that, like I said, I think really to me, the biggest thing about the Book of Mormon is the complexity of the troop movements and the movements of these bodies over periods of time. And I really, really think that the most compelling argument could be is that he has it all mapped out. I think that's the one takeaway I want people to get from this is that you can certainly see how he could have the whole story up in his head and have everything, be able to remember everything exact.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So now let's go to the actual history and talk about the treasured, like,
John, sorry, I did want to, because you were making a reference to parallelomania.
yeah,
It's hard to say that this is. It's different to come up with 3 letters in the Middle East than like these are proven theories and things that are talked about in Joseph Smith's time.
Right.
So we're not taking like things that were taught in Central America and then saying, oh, maybe Joseph heard about those things.
like Oliver Cowdery
Right.
literally attended the church where Ethan Smith who
Right.
authored The View of the Hebrews,
Right,
which
that's-
contained the Mound Builder myth. Like Oliver Cowdery attended that dude's congregation,
and
right?
actually-
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's
Like,
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing I do want to say. Like when you use the NHM and the potential launching point in the Middle East, that would not have been, of course, a parallel that he would have been aware of. But also, I don't necessarily consider those parallels because
Right.
they're kind of the closest thing to bullseyes for the Book of Mormon. So I think the parallelism is when you see with Ethan Smith, what he's doing is like, well, the Native Americans wash their hands a certain way that parallels a Jewish purification ritual. So it's this idea of trying to find commonalities within the Native American populations that existed at the time. And then this is what Protestants were doing. They were trying to find a influence of Hebrew practices amongst the Native Americans and then paralleling that with them and then making the argument for the 10 lost tribes, which could have influenced the parallelism that you would find in the Book of Mormon, and then why modern apologists would use those same parallels as a defense of the Book of Mormon.
But would people who want to provide a secular explanation for the Book of Mormon be using parallelism to try and demonstrate the more cultural influences of the Book of Mormon? Are you saying that would not qualify as parallelism, to be sort of saying, here's where the Lehi's dream comes from? It comes from.
Oh yeah, no, that would be parallelism in that. And there's 2 different ways of look. Yeah, I would say one is parallels and one's influences. I guess you could say.
Yeah, because if Joseph's got a certain version of the King James Bible,
Right.
and it's literally word for word appearing in the Book of Mormon, that's not parallelism, right?
Right.
What is that?
That's just I mean, you're just copying, right?
Yeah, so that's what you're saying, Gerardo.
Yeah, that's what
is
I'm
that it's not fair to compare modern Mormon apologetics.
Some
with
Mormon
some.
apologetics, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we've got, let's start with Joseph Smith treasure digging.
Mm-hmm.
When do you think, talk about the emergence of Joseph's participation in treasure digging with also the emergence of the idea of the Book of Mormon? Because Joseph Smith's treasure digging, well, we think that Joseph Smith Sr. might have been treasure digging before.
Yeah, with the Woodscrape.
Probably with Hiram and there was Sally Hemings, Sally Chase and others treasure digging, but also the Book of Mormon. The idea for the Book of Mormon emerges in 1823. Mm-hmm. So talk about like the origins of both the treasure digging and the emergence of the idea for a book, which doesn't come until 7 years after the idea for the book.
Yep. So in 1820, of course, Joseph Smith has his first vision. And then this spring, roughly...
Does he? Like,
no, this is the narrative. No, I think that Joseph Smith had a born-again experience in 1820. I think he had a spirit.
I think it was in 1823, because
Well, that's if you're following... In other words, I think what happens is that there was something that happened to Joseph Smith in 1820, okay?
You do think that?
Yeah, but the later story about again, there's additions to the story that take place later on.
Right.
So the idea of revivals happening in 1823, he adds that to the story later on. I don't think that changes that something happened in 1820. I just think he takes the things that happen after the fact and adds it into the first vision later on. That's kind of the position that I take. So
but you had a childhood.
Yeah.
What's it called? Epiphany or
just
born again experience.
Born again experience. Yeah.
So I mean, you would probably empathize with that part of Joseph Smith's story.
I think that we can date the first vision or something happening to 1820 personally. And
Theophany, is that what it's called?
Yeah,
Theophany?
yeah. Okay. Epiphany. Well, theophany, and there's either way. I just think personally that
people at that time were seeing visions of God and seeing God and Jesus and having experiences very similar to Stephen from the Bible, right? Like it was not unheard of.
Yeah, Brent Metcalf and I talked about that, how there was, he found some parallels that actually kind of got him kicked out. Eventually would get him kicked out of the church for finding some of this stuff.
Because there's at least like 20 accounts of people having
Yeah.
a very similar experience of God and Jesus or the Lord.
Yeah.
Before, in the 10 years prior to Joseph Smith
Yeah.
claiming to have his first vision.
And again, this is almost like later on, because at this point, I think that Joseph is a believing Christian in 1820. He's sincere in his faith. And I think that he did have some kind of experience. And then in the spring of 1821 is when he starts taking up, roughly thereabouts, taking up the operation of money digging, right? And what is money? Of course, most of us know, and the audience is pretty well versed in this, is that he was involved in looking for lost buried treasure. Many thought lost Spanish mines, lost treasure of pirates. And so he was hired out to use these mystical, magical practices to track down these items. And it would have people go through these particular ceremonies that they would have to go through at certain times at night. And sometimes it may have been involved in sacrificing dogs, lambs, and things as a blood offering to the guardian spirit of those treasures. So this is all part of the lore. And of course, Mark Elwood's graphic novel beautifully illustrates these stories that were going on at the time. And so this is a world that's steeped in the occult. And Joseph appears to have been very much actively participating in this. It's very well documented that this is indeed the case.
What do you think of the idea that Joseph was just, because I think even the church to this day wants to claim a little bit that Joseph was just digging the holes, but not really.
And I was going to ask that too. How did Joseph Smith become the gifted one who could find things versus just the shovel, dirt digger? Do you know how that emerges? Do you have a sense for how that emerges?
I think Joseph has the ability to weave tales and stories in such a way that he can convince people. So I have an aunt who's a great storyteller. My mom used to tell me this all the time. She would tell these stories that were so believable, and she'd make them up, but after a while, she would believe her own stories. And so I think that the power of being able to tell a story that's very compelling, that maybe you even start believing yourself, is what gets him up in the ranks of, this is the guy, this is the leader, this guy has the gift. I think there were other claimants, others that claimed to have this power, but I think Joseph was able to tell a better story and a more compelling story to give people good reason to believe that there is lost treasure somewhere.
When you say the gift, do you mean the gift of what?
The gift of treasure seeking, the gift of being able to kind of be like a person who can see hidden things using his seer stone.
And this is really important because every Mormon knows the term prophet, seer, and revelator.
Yep.
But this is Joseph's beginning, he's viewed as a seer.
A treasure seer.
And the word seer comes out of folk magic lore. Am I wrong?
Which is bigger than a prophet, right?
Yeah.
In the Book of Mormon, it says a seer is greater than a prophet.
Yeah.
But what did the term seer, was that?
That would have been a term that was, there is seer in the Bible,
right?
But it would have been something that maybe the occult people would have glommed onto and made like the principle, like a real important term within their worldviews. Because all these treasure seekers, they are stooped in the biblical world, so they're going to use biblical language as well. But yeah, seer becomes like the most important character in this whole enterprise.
And so is Joseph starting to go on treasure digs with family and neighbors? I mean, if I were going to go on a treasure dig, I'd much rather be the dude viewed as having magical powers who can find the stuff than the dude who just has to schlep the shovel and dig a whole lot. Right. I mean, it's a cooler gig in the treasure digging world. It's kind of like the apex predator, so to speak, right? Am I wrong?
Well, I mean,
it would be the position to aspire to if you wanted to have the most influence and power in the group.
It would have been the position I would have aspired to.
Me too. And so, so in your view, Joseph, do you think he started thinking he really had that gift, or do you think he's just like, I'd rather do that than dig? Do you have a thought about that?
Perhaps it was a good way to get out of work, but perhaps he he might start believing his own stories, right? I think that could very well be that he maybe, I think so the idea of looking through spiritual eyes, through your mind's eye, and all these kind of things, that he's seeing something, he's describing something. So I think he's thinking that he is seeing something. I think that it's a con, but you also feel that, I don't know, I think that it seems to me that being having a superstitious worldview is that you believe that magic is real. You believe in black magic and white magic, and you believe in they really believed this stuff. I mean, Joseph wore a talisman and all this kind of stuff. So it was ingrained in his worldview. So I think that on some level that, yeah, he probably did believe he had this power. And I think that as the stories get more interesting, I think they're becoming more real to him. And so I think he's getting better at telling these stories, and that's why he gets this reputation of being able to find these things. And then, of course, he maybe does demonstrations of finding things, but he may have been involved in
hiding,
like finding somebody's cows, but he's the one that put the cows out the pasture and then found them that way, those kind of things. But in the mind of people like that, that would not necessarily mean that they thought they were a fraud. They were just saying, well, this is a shortcut to prove that I have this gift. I'll just do this and then they'll all believe me, type kind of thing. That might have been something.
And it could be he was going back and forth. Maybe a day he believed, I don't know. That's pure bit speculation, but.
Well, like one of the questions I've had is there's this pattern of like leading everyone to a spot, saying that he can see the treasure. They all start digging. They get to the place where they really are saying, okay, there better be something here soon. And then Joseph's always saying, oh, you did the wrong thing. Spirit took it away. Yeah. In my mind, I'm always wondering like, okay, that happens every single time. Like if Joseph really believed he was seeing treasure in spirits, would there ever be a point where he's like, it seems interesting that we keep going on these digs and the treasure gets taken right before it's found. So either he thought about that, or he was fooling people.
Yeah,
you know.
I mean, and this is the thing, though, too, is like, yeah. I mean, this gets so hard because you're talking about Joseph and everything, and I hate. I mean, I love the guy, right, on some level, so I almost hate to even say too many things. But yeah, I mean, I think that on its most, if you just looked at it, brass knuckles or what brass tacks, whatever you call, that you're probably looking at a con man. You're probably looking at somebody who's conning people. Yeah. And you have a lot of people that believe that he has this gift, including his father.
So his dad's believing that he has the gift. So he's conning his own family.
Yeah, I think so.
And there's a motive because they need money and the farming isn't working out so well. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, that's they need the money. Like I said, I think the Smiths all believed that their magic was real. So I think that, and I think Joseph believed that it was real too, but I think that he also obviously had to be, in his mind, he had to figure he was making some of this stuff up too, right? I mean, I think because he was prone to, he would use deception at times to do this kind of stuff. So, but I think it was also an end justify the mean things. I've got this gift, but I also got to tell the story, but also, we need to make some money or whatever. And so, yeah, I think,
and I like to tell stories. And
yeah, I mean,
I like to have power because it's not cool. It's not uncool. It's kind of cool to be known as someone with special powers. Like to me, that's where the prophet stuff, it emerges out of the seer thing. It's like, there's this little kid who's like got this special power and the word gets around, not just through New York, but also Pennsylvania. Right.
Yeah.
Or Josiah Stole wouldn't have sent for him.
Right.
So like he starts to be known amongst superstitious folk as a youth with special gifts and powers. And who doesn't want to be thought of that way? Right.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because that actually reminds me of a time when I was a young child and I made a spiritual claim that wasn't maybe 100% accurate and told some of my friends in the schoolyard. And all of a sudden, everybody started having dreams and visions. And it was almost like I started it. And I recognized what I did. And I remember I think I was in elementary school, And I told one of my friends, I think I would make a good cult leader. I could start a cult because I saw how it worked in my mind, that I made a claim that wasn't maybe, I don't know. I think in my own sincere way, I was trying to do something to bring people closer to faith.
Yeah.
And I kind of fudged it a little bit. And next thing you know, everybody believes me, the kids.
And they're believing more in Jesus.
Yeah. It causes disruption at the school that the teacher's like, all these kids are having dreams and visions and Jesus was appearing to them and they were giving all, I mean, it was just this little short-lived thing. And I kind of stepped back from it because like, oh my goodness, what hath I wrought? But yeah, it's like a distant memory I barely remember, but I do recognize how one person in sincere, and this is going back to the sincerity aspect, could say something, and then I recognize right then and there, oh, that's how you start something. That's how it works.
And if you believe in Jesus, and if whatever you're doing that isn't quite honest is causing people to believe in Jesus,
yeah,
it's like, hey, like what's the harm? More people are believing in Jesus. Ends justify the means because it's bringing people to Christ, right?
Well, I could have gone that direction. I backed off.
I'm not saying
but
you
yeah,
did,
people can.
But
do
you
that
can see how that could
all day.
Well, and that's Joseph's definition of good. It's on the Book of Mormon. He says that whatever brings you close to Christ is good, because the devil can't do the devil can't do anything that will bring you closer to Christ.
Yeah. And I live in a Christian community in Florida that almost every televangelist has been through. Benny Hinn got his start there. Benny Hinn was just there a few weeks ago. And I will tell you that I know Benny believes, but I also know that he uses deception.
I don't even know who that is.
He's one of the most famous televangelists in the last 20, 30 years. He's kind of fallen off a bit. But he was huge for a while there,
okay.
And yeah. But it's like I know what a pious prophet fraud can look like in a modern context.
Okay, so Joseph Smith's treasure digging. Yep. Your view is he was probably consciously defrauding people at some level, but also believing in Jesus.
Yep.
How does the Book of Mormon then start? The idea for the Book of Mormon emerge, and then how does that parallel his treasure digging?
I have a question. Wasn't there a prophecy or something one of his parents had that Joseph was going to be a prophet?
Yeah. Wasn't that his grandmother?
I can't remember.
Yeah, I think that there was going to be a prophet in the family. I think it was his grandmother. Yeah. That's early on in the whole process. Yeah. That this idea is there. There's no doubt.
And Alvin's not going to, it's not going to be Alvin because he died.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of them's got to step up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's very
a prophecy needs to be fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. And so somebody, and there's almost a familial expectation at this point, right? So, and this is the thing. Like as a young child, a lot of people thought that I had some prophetic calling as well. So I know what it's like to have that, to feel that sense of responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how does the idea, in your view, how does the idea of the Book of Mormon emerge in Joseph's mind?
So I think that, putting
it into a book, because he already talked about how the ideas are being developed.
All the storytelling, like Lucy is basically on record that he would captivate the family around the fire, and in the treasure digging, telling stories. So you're like you said, he's building the story of the book in his mind. But when to put it into a book, right? When does it emerge the conversation about it becoming a book?
Yeah, that's really good. I think that he conflates two things. So I think Joseph Smith is a Christian, and I think Joseph Smith is also a treasure digger. I think what we see, and I was talking to John Hamer about this, is that what makes the Book of Mormon so unique is that there have been other claims to have found ancient civilization records and other things at writings from Native Americans. And so this was an idea that was out there, right? So now we have physical gold or treasure, which is what he's been looking for. And then we also have this idea of a lost civilization, an explanation for the lost civilization. And I think that the genius is that you have these two worlds put together
Also, I just want to add to it, if it's okay. You've got this idea of, Captain Cook or whatever, killing one of the pirates, burying them with the treasure,
right?
So that a spirit's guarding the treasure.
There's a spirit guarding the treasure,
right?
Yeah.
So the golden plates are treasure.
Yep.
And then the angel Moroni is the spirit guarding the treasure. No.
Yeah. So that one, I mean, that's another example of taking a story that's magical and then giving it a Christian terminology, right? So you have an angel, and now you have scripture, and now you have treasure, and now you have an explanation of these mounds that we're digging in, right? So you have this just convergence all happening right then and there, and this is the story that he starts developing. And I think that, again, he has an idea of this story, and I think that this is going to provide all the answers to a lot of things. And I don't know how in 1823 how sophisticated he thinks this is going to get, and if he's really just telling a story that then maybe it's a story that really takes, and people are really, it's like Alvin's enthralled by this story, right? So it may be an example of taking a story that he's told multiple stories about multiple treasures, about multiple things, but this one maybe causes people to really take notice because it's a very unique story and it covers hits so many big notes in that world. And so maybe one can say that Joseph he's found the treasure that he's going to run with, because I've got something, I tell many stories, but this is the one that's most compelling, that people are most interested in asking about, that my brother Alvin is most fascinated by. So I think that's when he starts really using this as an opportunity to start developing this world that he's probably already started developing. But I think that's where it all happens. I think that he finally found a hit that he knew would work and cause people to really listen to a story and be fascinated by it, and that would give him then a status that would put him on a different level too, like above any of the other seers.
He's now just not a seer; he's a translator now, and right, if he finds.
Yeah. So is he thinking of himself being a translator at the time when he finds it? I don't know, but he's. I think he's at this point. The story is still early on, and the role he's going to play is probably still in its evolution.
Right. But
I think what happens is he like I said, there's many stories he told that we don't know about, but we know he told a lot of stories. But this is probably the one that really was the one that grabbed people's attention, and this is the start of it.
And tell me if I'm wrong, but by 1823, one story he never told was the story of the first vision.
Right.
Because there's no evidence that he ever told anyone that he saw Jesus or God in Jesus by 1823.
Oh yeah, this is
right.
This is beyond dispute. Nobody knew about the first vision in the early 1830s. If you, like John Hamer said, if you had said the first vision, they would have thought, oh, you mean Angel Moroni.
Which is 1823. So in 1823 is the first time he ever tells anybody that he actually has some angelic visitation. So at some point, I guess he basically either manufactures or has what he believes to be a visit by an angel. And that's when he first starts telling people that we know of that he's been visited by a celestial being. Is that right?
Yeah. So this is a different story because.
And is it Nephi or is it Moroni?
Well, yeah, that's the question, because some of the early accounts say it was Nephi, and so the story still is still being fleshed out probably years later, right? We don't know exactly what he was telling people back then, but I think he's telling people about relatively early on, he's telling people about the hill Cumorah.
And the name might have come from
the Comoros Islands with the capital Moroni. So it's from Billy the Kid, treasure seek, pirate lores, Captain Kidd's stories of buried treasure, and those are areas that stories that Joseph would have been familiar with.
Do you think that's a significant connection? Because a lot of people want to dismiss that, but like the fact that he was a treasure digger, he knew about Captain Kidd, and then in a book with a map, it's got Moroni and Cumorah on the same map. That's like a lot of coincidences.
Yeah, that one never really stuck for me.
Okay.
I never thought that was terribly
to you, that's not even relevant. You don't think he got Moroni or Cumorah from pirate lore.
Yeah, no, I never, that one to me was never a real strong argument.
Okay.
I think there's at least one account of a neighbor saying that he was a fan of Captain Kidd stories.
Yeah, and we know that I'm sure that was an influence, but I just think that I don't think it's a very strong argument. But
right.
I do think that it's interesting because his grandmother, or his mother used the term hill at Cumorah. A lot of people thought that it was added on later on about the hill Cumorah, and so people, and this gets into the Heartland stuff, but basically I think that the early terminology wasn't hill Cumorah, but it was hill at Cumorah, and it evolves into hill Cumorah, which I kind of think takes that naming convention, because within the Great Lakes region you have this very interesting naming convention for lakes. It's Lake Erie, Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, hill Cumorah. I think it almost like has this naming convention that he kind of follows, but I think it was probably originally called hill at Cumorah.
Okay.
Or hill of Cumorah, one of those two. Yeah.
But he starts telling his family and siblings that an angel appeared to him and said what?
Oh, well, he introduces himself as a survivor of this lost civilization, and this is the record of the inhabitants of this land, and that he's got to go, and at some point he's going to be able to retrieve these records and be able to then tell the story, eventually become the translator and of these records of this ancient civilization. And that's the whole story. That's the beginning of Mormonism right there. Yeah.
But it's a 4-year delay between his claim of an original visitation and him actually starting work on the book. How do you explain why did he include in the story a 4-year wait? Yeah.
So, the story goes is that every September 22nd, he's visiting the hill and he attempts to retrieve the plates.
And that's an important date, right?
Yeah, it is, because it's an important date within the magical world, right? And it's the fall equinox, and that plays an important role in like, for instance, astrology and farmers' almanacs, and all these had all these dates that were significant, and that they had these magical attributes to those dates and everything like that. So the idea is that he's making these attempts to get the plates. Now, I just wonder if he wants to be able to, he's still working on the story, and so he just has to go. And I don't think every September 22nd he probably is going.
Yeah, Dan Vogel says that never happened.
Yeah.
that was a later fabrication.
So it could be, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if he does make those trips, because it's a magical night.
Right.
And you've already told the story about the plates, so why wouldn't you make that part of your narrative at that time as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of how I would think. Maybe it's part of the story that is this narrative that he's trying to create. So, yeah, it's an important date now that he's going there every night, and every September 22nd, or at least some of them. And that's, as a Christian, as an evangelical, right? It's bothersome that a lot of practices that involve what would be cult-like or occult type practices, those are red flags for a lot of Christians too. That where we would have objections to the coming forth of the Book of Mormon as well.
Aren't there many questions around what was really the story? Like John brought up the Nephi versus Moroni. I think there's an account of it being a tote or something along those lines, which is where Mark Hoffman gets his idea for the salamander letter.
Yeah, so there was a story going around that it was a magical toad, and the idea that, and that's why, see, this is the thing, is like, why did these stories,
A toad.
Yeah. I mean,
It's a credible account.
That there was this toad involved in
it
this.
becomes an angel somehow,
and then
right?
morphs into, I mean, so we have these stories that are out there, and I guess the argument is that they're more superstitious, and then they get more Christian as the story evolves and stuff like that.
Yeah. Because the church, because growing up, what I was taught was that Joseph was going every year to get instructions from Moroni about how to handle the plates and how to maybe translate them and how to use the spectacles and all that stuff. And that's why he had to take 3
He's
years.
going to prophet school.
Yeah. Well, that's what pretty much the current LDS curriculum says.
Yeah.
But like I'm saying, it seems like all that whole story developed later, because there's a lot of other accounts that don't tell that it's not that consistent.
I mean, I can see him not going at all. I can see him going every September 22nd and doing magical rituals, which would have been tied in with that treasure seeking world. Or he's seen Moroni every September 22nd, right? I mean, those are, I think, your three narratives there.
And why didn't he just start writing the book in 1823? Do you have a thought on that?
I think that, I think he's still probably developing the story. I think maybe he recognizes that it's becoming something and I better get it right. And so I need time to develop the story.
Because if the book is as miraculous as everybody says, he's going to have to spend a lot of time developing it. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think he's got the outline. I think he's got a general idea, and he's got all the influences. He needs time to flesh out the story. Plus, he's got other things going on too. But I think it buys him time, from that time to the other. I think throughout this whole time, people are asking him about the plates. They want to know about them. So he knows he's probably got something here, and he's got to really make sure he tells a good story.
Isn't there a story? I remember being told a story of he would go there and try to get them, and then he would be like shocked or
there's a story.
He would be, somehow the angel was like, no, you're not worthy enough yet. You're not good enough yet to be able to touch them. And so then he would have to bury him back up, put the rock back on, and then he would say, come back a year from now. That's what I was told. That was the story I was told.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else has heard that story too.
And for me, that comes from treasure lore of this slippery treasure, which actually is a term used in the Book of Mormon itself. Yep. But it's this idea that comes from the treasure digging practices that if you didn't do quite the right thing, the slippery, the treasure becomes slippery, that the spirit takes it away and you don't get it. Like that's another direct borrowing from treasure digging lore that I was also told, Jenn.
And not only that, but part of it also is too, is that the idea is that Joseph had to be prepared to take the plates because he got it too early. He had to quit being like that. The greedy Joseph Smith might want to take that and sell it. And so it's almost like it's telling you that Joseph is kind of telling you about what kind of person he was at the time. Because he's even telling you that the story is that until the preparation was right for him to be in the right space to take these plates, he had to kind of remove the greediness of the person that he was at this time, which seems to tell you that was maybe his mindset. It kind of, to me, it's a tell. It might be a tell of him making a point that his greed was one of the reasons that kept him from being able to get the plates. Yeah.
And I would imagine that telling everyone in 1823, hey, angels are visiting me, and there's this there's this deposit of gold that I know where it is, and someday I'm going to have access to it. I imagine that would generate a lot of cool attention by superstitious folk who are poor and need money. It's like, whoa, someday not only are angels going to come out of the sky and like help this kid find this buried gold treasure, but maybe I can get rich from it, right? Or maybe the heavens are opened. I imagine that Joseph benefited from that legend of having had that experience and of the promise someday that he's going to be uncovering a boatload of gold.
Yeah.
Right?
I think, I just think this is the world's all converging, you can say.
Jenn, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just wondering if this was the same time where he was actively doing treasure digging for other people.
Yes.
Like this story that he's telling everyone, would that be kind of like a validation that he can do this? Like a story that he's telling everyone else. I don't know if it was going on at the same time.
Yeah, it was, for sure.
Yeah. It was, it's all tied in with the treasure digging years, and it's all paralleling each other. I think that this is the thing: you have all these competitors that are making claims to have these powers.
Lumen,
Lumen Waters, and then you had Sally Chase, and you had there would have been many people. I mean, the reason why we know there were many people doing this is because they had laws on the books in New York that kept you from doing it. You don't write laws unless you have a problem, right? So you have a lot of people and so there's this pecking order of status that's going on. Well, you could say that he made the like ultimate claim that puts him at the top of the heap, right?
There's this story that Don Vogel tells that I really like of when Joseph takes a seer, and I can't remember if it was Lumen Walters or someone else. He takes him to the hill, and he says, he takes his seer stone and says, here's where the treasure is. Can you see it? Do you remember that story?
Yes. So it's really interesting because I don't remember it's another guy. He's a peer of Joseph's. Yeah. And they're still standing at Hill Cumorah. And this is the introduction of the spectacles into the story.
Right.
Okay. Right. So what you have here is and this actually you could say this is how outdoing each other, right?
Mark talked about this in my interview with Mark.
Yeah.
The glass liquor.
So Elwood. Yes. And Mark's a great guy. Yeah. I love him. That they're standing there next to each other and they're telling each other what they're seeing, and then they're describing it. I see a stone box.
Do you see it?
Do you see it? Yeah. Yes, I do. You see gold plates. Yes. And so this is the story that Joseph was already introduced, right? And then his companion says, do you see spectacles? Do you see? And then Joseph says,
because if Joseph says no, then he doesn't have that much power.
Right.
He has less power
I think,
to see the spectacles.
Yeah. I think the story goes that Joseph's peer says, do you see the spectacles? And Joseph says, no. And he says, well, look again.
Okay.
And Joseph is like, oh, now I see them. Yeah. And so it was kind of like a power play on who's the bigger seer. Well, Joseph had to look twice, but I need you. But I'm still gonna vouch for your plates, but you have to recognize I saw something that you couldn't see.
So now they both have skin in the game, right? Yeah. So this guy has now attached himself to the plates as well, because now the spectacles make it into the story.
Yeah. So Joseph now has to have spectacles later on because now they're spectacles.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So
and just so we could tie this in a little bit too. The story of the narrative goes is they were oversized spectacles. Yeah. And this is another influence of this 19th century period.
The giants.
Because a lot of people believe that giants constructed the mounds. It was a race of giants, as in the Bible, and that these was the oversized spectacles because they were built by a giant. And in Don Bradley's book, The Lost 116 Pages, he talks about stories that implies that the Nephites, when they landed, when Lehi's party landed, that they encountered ruins that appeared to have been built by giants. Mm-hmm. So we do have another early source of the story. Now, the oversized spectacle part maybe is not part of the story yet, but that's just another story going around that there were giants that built these mounds. Right. That kind of makes it into the idea of oversized spectacles, but also apparently in the Lost 116 Pages, giants do make their appearance in some sense in the Book of Mormon, in the Lost Book of Lehi. And
that's why Rod Meldrum mentioned giants in my
Well, you asked him about giants,
Yeah.
There, so just about talking about the spectacles, just really quick, it seems like there was a back and forth between, yes, they're giant spectacles, and the church today will teach that the spectacles were big and too large, and maybe that's why Joseph had to use his seer stone later, because they just didn't fit him. Mm-hmm. But in reality, when he retrieves the plates, the story that his family tells is that he has just some like stones inside a cloth that just Lucy touches. It's nothing huge. Right? Am I right?
Right. So it's interesting, though, too, because in the narrative, Joseph seemed to be more intrigued by the spectacles than the plates themselves. So apparently we have something that was fashioned like the size of spectacles that she was able to feel. And she comments that he was more interested in those. So that's what always fascinates me, those spectacles and his fascination with them over the plates. I don't think she describes them as oversized, but the narrative is that they were oversized.
Right.
And yeah, it's just that's a fascinating vestige that I'm still exploring, because I think that there's an apologetic argument that I could make, because I do make apologetic arguments in favor of the Book of Mormon as well.
Yeah.
And I actually made one to Richard Bushman that he had never heard before, that I include with the seer stone and the spectacles. So basically, one of the arguments that I make, and this is kind of off topic, but we'll just have a little fun with this right now, is that in the Old Testament narrative, Moses goes up to Sinai, and God uses his own finger to create the 10 Commandments. Moses goes down from Sinai, and he sees the sins and wickedness of the people. He smashes those 10 Commandments, and as a punishment, God makes Moses construct the tablets himself with his own hands. Right? So now we don't have a divine, we have man-made, a man writing these things down. And the argument goes, and I sometimes wonder, were the 10 Commandments that God wrote, were they more grace-based? But because a man was constructing the stones, they became more works-based? I sometimes wonder. Is that what happens then is that he's punished, and so he has to do it with his own hands. Early on in the process, Joseph Smith, as we're doing the translation of the Book of Mormon, loses the last 116 pages. And according to Dan Vogel and others, of course, then we have the story, the plates are gone, and so are the spectacles. And the argument is that perhaps the first 116, Dan Vogel doesn't agree with this, but some have argued that the first 116 pages may have been using the spectacles.
Right. That's the story the church tells. And I think Richard Bushman's theory is that he used the spectacles for the lost. But Dan Vogel says he used the seer stone for everything. He used the seer stone,
the whole thing. But let's just say that he used these spectacles for the last 116 pages. This is the apologetic argument, is that he gets...
They've got plenty of airtime. We don't need to hear that.
No, to go into it. I asked him.
He asked me because, well, and this is the argument that I'm making, is because nobody's ever used this one before, is that Joseph gets the plates back, but as punishment, he has to use the seer stone, just like Moses had to use his own hands to construct the 10 Commandments. So now he has to carry this burden, and he's making a mockery that Joseph has to now use the seer stone, these instruments of man, these instruments of the cult, to translate the Book of Mormon. And therefore, that's why we don't have as good of a Book of Mormon as you could have had you had the divine spectacles.
Okay.
Just like maybe we had a better edition of the 10 Commandments.
No,
I think it's really
joking.
cool.
I'm joking. No, it is cool. Okay, so 4 years go by and there's no book. What is it about 18? I know the answer. What is it that's magical about 1827, where all of a sudden a book starts to be created? What changes it from like this promised book in the future to an actual project?
Well, I think part of it is he's got married, right, and he's got a family.
Before then,
right? Wait.
There was this idea that the jig was up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Because at this point he had,
treasure digging. I don't mean to be leading the witness. I'm kind of leading the witness.
But at this point,
so he treasure digs from 1823 to 1827. What happens in 1827?
Well, then we had the Glasslicker trial. Right.
So for those who don't know.
Okay, so basically, and again, for a long time, the church denied that this ever happened. It was a Protestant minister who was a mentor of Dan Vogel's that uncovered the records in the courthouse.
Walter?
Yes, I think so. Yeah,
Leslie Walters.
Yeah, yep. And basically, Joseph Smith was put on trial for doing, this glass-looking treasure digging stuff, which is against the laws, like we mentioned in New York. So, and this is what's so interesting too, is that, so now we have the trial transcripts. And so now we know that this did happen, that he was a treasure digger, and that we know the story, which, so the enemies of Joseph were telling a true story about Joseph that was then later confirmed in the 1960s when these documents were found. And so you have, the most interesting thing to me is that you have Joseph Smith Sr. saying in there that he has this gift, and I wish that he would use it for the glory of God or for more good things, like religious reasons, as opposed to for gain, like filthy lucre, right? And so I think this then really makes it clarifies everything. Now we know what we're doing now. I had this gift. I was using it in a proper way. My father believes I had this gift. And so this is where we make the absolute turn. So maybe this story then is going to become more biblical and it's going to become more religious. And now we're moving in a Christian direction. He then is able to move away from the whole treasure digging operation, but still has a gift that his father believes that he has. Joseph believes that he has it. And now it's going to become a different endeavor. And it's not going to be about treasure. It's going to be about telling a story, creating this whole, finally telling the story of these plates.
And bringing people to Christ. But before we talk about that, there's two things I want to really highlight about what you just said. Not only did Joseph's dad, Joseph Sr., still believe that Joseph Smith Jr. had the power, but so did Josiah Stole. Mm-hmm. And he was the center of the trial. Mm-hmm. And so for me, one thing that comes out of the treasure digging experience, and you can look at it kind of from a quasi-faithful point of view or a charlatan fraud point of view. From a quasi-faithful point of view, you have a lot of people that are left believing that Joseph Smith had special powers, even though he never found any treasure, correct?
Yes. Josiah made it very clear that he should be found now guilty because he really does have these real powers.
So that shows the ability to make people think you have special powers, even if you don't. And that's real, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. I mean, this is, like I said, this happens all the time, really. I mean, this certain type of individuals can do this kind of, a certain type of charismatic individual can, and there's plenty of people out there that would fall for these kind of things, certainly. Yeah.
And that's got to feel great. I mean, who doesn't want to walk around having your peers believe that you have special powers? Like a superhero, right?
Yeah, I mean, that, like I said, we all would have taken Joseph's position over the digger. So
Joseph would have wanted to get rid of treasure digging because he knew he was going to end up in prison for the rest of his life if he didn't give it up. Yeah. But he wouldn't want to get rid of the perception that he had special powers, correct?
And I think the story of the plates is so compelling to so many people that it's the last vestige that is hanging on, that he hangs on to, that then he's able to pivot.
It's a pivot.
Yep.
It's a pivot that allows him to retain the perception that he has special powers and to, quote, use those special powers. No?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely appears that would be the case, John. Yeah. I think so.
And then the other thing is we have Isaac Hales through another source. Mm-hmm. We have someone who testifies in an affidavit that they saw Joseph Smith and Isaac Hale together, where Joseph is effectively sobbing, saying, to Emma's dad, yep. I know I stole your daughter away from you. I know we eloped. I know you think I'm a charlatan. I know you went on those treasure digs with me. You saw that I never got any treasure. And then what Joseph is reportedly telling Emma's dad, Isaac Hale, according to this source, who claims to be a firsthand witness, right?
Yeah.
I never saw anything to begin with in those. Yeah. In my stone. Am I right?
Yeah, that's what the affidavit says. Yeah, I mean, this is an early thing. And yeah, I mean, so this is, you're building a pretty strong case here that, he was probably a con man and he never had these powers. And, and then the jig is up in this whole enterprise of treasure digging. So he's got to find a way of, he's got newly married and he's got this story that really seems to resonate and he's got believers. And so, like we said, that's the pivot.
And he's had 4 years or 10 years to develop it, depending on.
Yeah.
Right. And people want, of course, we made this joke in our Sandra Tanner interview that like, whenever there's a quote that's inconvenient, the church wants to discredit the source or say, oh, it happened too long ago or too long after, or it was an anti-Mormon. So the church really wants to always love sources that reaffirm its narrative. Like all of us, confirmation bias, it wants to love the sources that reaffirm the narrative and discredit and dismiss any source. So people want to say, well, whatever that testimony was, first of all, Isaac Hale was incredible because he hated Joseph Smith. And the other source of the person that heard Joseph and Isaac talking, maybe that was part of Mormonism Unveiled or the Hurlbut affidavits. What do you make of as an external dispassionate observer of the records, what do you make of that story that somebody heard Joseph sobbing to Isaac saying, "I never saw anything in the seer stone"?
Well, I think that the idea that the enemies of Joseph were making up stories about him, that they could not be found they're not credible. I think you find the court records that pretty much tells everybody that what they were talking about Joseph was accurate. So we know that these affidavits have some validity to them. And the story, it gives it credence to say that look, if we never find those affidavits, they can go along and say that this was all made up by Joseph's enemies, but we have those affidavits. We know that a lot of the stuff that his enemies were saying about the treasure digging was accurate. So that gives more weight to those other testimonies as well, because we know that he was a treasure digger and the church was denying that he wasn't. And we have a pretty compelling, another piece of evidence that one can use. And, I don't know. It seems like, I don't know about that specifically. I think that it kind of rings true, when you read it too. It sounds like a real story that happened. And partly too is because if you're an enemy of Joseph, why do you make Joseph seem like such a decent guy in the affidavit? He's sorry, he feels bad, he's weeping. If you hate Joseph, I don't know if you make him that human in the story, in the affidavit. I think that's why I think it rings more true.
And also, we forget that Isaac Hale was a firsthand witness of the treasure digs, because he went on the treasure digs with Josiah Stole and Joseph, because he writes about that in his own witness, and it's his own son-in-law. I don't think he wants his son-in-law to be a horrible human.
Right.
And that's how Joseph met Emma, is he was boarding with the Hales so that he could treasure dig.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Isaac is a credible witness. And then when you think about why would Joseph be sobbing and apologizing? Well, it's because Joseph would have absconded with Isaac's daughter, eloped, ran away, but then that clearly they weren't enjoying their stay in New York. Mm-hmm. They probably needed money. They probably needed a home. Yeah. So they had to turn tail, come back and come on, Isaac, we're married now. Yeah. We need a place to stay. But Isaac's like, well, you're involved in a really disreputable business. Yep. I don't want you around my home. What's Joseph going to do?
Yeah. I mean, that to me just seems like the most obvious conversation that would have happened. It just seems like it, like you said, he's a reliable witness. And I think if he could tell the story of Joseph in a much worse way, I think he makes him out to be somebody who seemed to really feel bad about what he was doing. And he wanted to patch things up with his father-in-law, and his father-in-law portrayed it that way. And it just seems like it's as good of an affidavit as there anything out there about Joseph.
And in that explanation, Joseph says, I never saw anything.
Yeah, never saw anything. Yeah, that's the thing. Right, yeah, that's what he said. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So treasure digging's behind us now. Tell us, this is like the next major part, which is probably the culminating part. Everybody wants to say, I mean, the narrative is, what is it, 90 days or 100 days? There's no way the Book of Mormon could have been written in 90 days or 100 days. But first of all, that doesn't count the 10 years prior that he had to doesn't count all the context that informs the Book of Mormon that we started part 1 of this episode discussing. And then it doesn't include part 2, which is him developing the story in his mind from 1820 all the way to 1827 or 1829, depending on when you're counting, right? Mm-hmm. But then he's got 3 years. He's got 1827, 1830 to produce the book. Mm-hmm. So what's your view on how he ends up writing the book?
This is another thing where I can personally see how it would work, because I was a very slow typist. So I often would dictate my papers I would have hey, can I dictate this paper to you in college? And I had about two or three people that would have done it for me. And I was somebody that I could read a lot of books and take a lot of information from a lot of sources and be able to, on the fly, write a paper through dictation and the person's typing the paper and saying, how are you doing this? How are you able to have all this memory and recollection and even know footnotes? Like I at some point, I can't do it now, but I could even like get pretty close to the page number of where this footnote was and everything like that. So I had this ability to dictate very quickly and create a college paper in a way that they're like, how are you able to do that? So I often thought that was always my thing. Like, that's how Joseph must have been able to do it. And be able to just create this paper in this way, is kind of unusual. I don't know of a lot of people that do that, because I was able to dictate, but also have them write a paper very quickly. And I just thought that's one mechanism that Joseph was able to do. And I think that he has this story. It's so alive in his mind that even the next day when they stop off where he's able to start right at the beginning, right where they stopped off, is according to what the testimony is. I think that he just had this unique capacity. I was around his age dictating these college papers when he would have been dictating the Book of Mormon. And I just often thought that I had a weird ability to do that kind of thing. And I sometimes wonder if that would be my personal experience. Why I have such a connection to Joseph is because I kind of have a feeling on some small level. I think his might have been magnified by 100, but I could see this is how he did it. I just felt very confident just by the way, because everybody was astounded that I could do it. Not everybody, just a handful of people. And it wasn't something I bragged about. It's just something but I thought this is the mechanism. I think this is how it could have been done.
And I think John Vogel, when he has this numbers that he comes up about how many words and how many hours a day he had to do.
Yeah.
And Dan Vogel's question is like, why he didn't do it faster? Like he could have done it way faster.
Well, let's talk about that. So like 1827, what's your understanding of the history of how the actual writing of the book begins and proceeds?
Well, I mean, this would of course be the last 116 pages that he would have been starting on. At this point, he would have gotten.
So who's his first scribe?
Well, the primary scribe for the last 116 pages was Martin Harris. And,
was Emma first?
But Emma may have been involved in it first, yeah. And her handwriting, we know. I think even in the Joseph Smith Papers Project, they might have even identified some of her in the later documents as well. I could be wrong, but I think they've identified part of it. But so she did serve as a scribe, which also then tells us how the translation process happened. And then Martin Harris gets involved, and I think Martin is involved partly because he's funding it as well. But yeah, so and I was thinking about the Dan Vogel thing about the time scales aren't as impressive as people think, that he did this in that short of a period of time. He would only have had to dictate a relatively small amount of words a day over this period of time to realistically have composed this.
Over 3 years?
Well, I think that...
Over the 90 days.
Like, yeah.
Well, let's start with the 116 pages.
Yeah.
So he gets Martin Harris involved. Martin Harris, is helping fund it at some level?
Yeah, well, he's the guy that has already started to believe, he believes Joseph, and he's been giving him some money to help him with his endeavor. And so Joseph includes him in on the translation process. And so Martin gets to be part of this process of translating the Book of Mormon. And that's how he gets involved in the whole thing.
And what's your understanding of the mechanics of his translation with Martin?
Yeah. So, this is where we have the whole idea. Was he using a stone in the hat? Was he using the interpreters? That kind of stuff like that. Now, from what Dan Vogel will tell us, is that from the very beginning, he was using the stone in the hat. And part of the reason why we know this is that Martin Harris described the stone and also described how Joseph was able to find things like a needle in literally like a needle in a haystack type kind of situation. So Martin Harris actually testifies to the veracity of the seer stone. And so he believed it was the right instrument. But also we also have Martin Harris attesting to the fact that he had secretly taken the seer stone out of the hat and replaced it with another seer stone. And Joseph, of course, buries his head in the hat, and says, "It's as dark as Egypt here. What's going on?" So apparently the seer stone was used early on in the process. Apparently the interpreters were not used in this process, because Martin Harris seems to attest to the use of the seer stone from the very beginning of the process of translation. And because Jim Martin was testing him too, he had to see if he could really do it. And so he was convinced by the power of the seer stone based on the finding of the needle, and also that Joseph wasn't fooled wasn't using the wrong rock.
Would there have been a drape between Joseph and Martin? And would plates have been in the room?
Okay, well, this is the thing. I do believe that at some point in the translation process, there were plates in the room. Okay? I don't think it would...
Let's get to that in the timeline when we
Okay, that's fine. But the standard narrative goes is that there was a curtain between them. Joseph was reading out of the hat, and Martin was copying down what he was writing. Yeah. So and indications are that at this time in many cases there was nothing in the room but Joseph using a hat and reading off the stone.
Even with Martin.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Martin. I know that I think Grant Palmer has an illustration of it in his book of Martin Harris and him doing that. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you think? How do you think Joseph is producing the text and fooling Martin? And again, we're talking about that lost 116 pages, right. But like, if you had to, and we've got William Davis, we've had on Mormon Stories. Yeah. I'm guessing you've had William Davis on.
He's coming on. I haven't read the book yet, so I'm waiting to read the book. Yeah.
Like, do you have a theory for the 116 pages, number one, how Joseph was producing what would become the text, how he was fooling Martin?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it comes down to just his ability to tell the story and be able to, I think, he was able to dictate the Book of Mormon in a way, in the way that I was able to dictate these college papers. I think he's telling the story. Did he have a 1769 King James Version with him? Well, at this point, we're talking about the later times when he wasn't.
It would have been a secular, the 116 pages would have been more secular.
That's the argument, yeah, that the religious part, that the small plates of Nephi were more religious than the original lost 116 pages. And of course, Don Bradley, we've had him on, and it does tell a different narrative of the story. There's some fascinating stories that go on that are outside of that. So yeah, but now Don advocates that there was more religious stuff in the lost 116 pages than some people give it credit for. He thinks there's some lost temple rituals that are in there and stuff like that. But yeah, it was generally considered to be more secular in its orientation.
It was a secular story.
Yeah.
Not as much a religious story.
Yep. It's more like a history, right? Which would have been kind of the original intent of what the Book of Mormon was. It was to tell the story of the lost inhabitants of this land. So it seems to have been more like a straight up history than it would have been more of a religious document. That seems to be the indication there.
And do we know anything, and I should know this, but I don't, like what was the content? Was there a Nephi and a Lehi and a Laman and Lemuel in the 116 pages? Do we have any indication of what the content was of the 116 pages?
Yeah, so there seems to be some indication that that there is Nephi, that they make a landing, according to Don Bradley's. These are stories that people told about the lost 116 pages that were recorded, and then they realized that, wait a second, these aren't in the Book of Mormon. These must have been what's from the lost 116 pages. So Joseph Smith Sr. relays some story. Martin Harris's brother relays some stories from the Book of Mormon. And as I mentioned earlier, they make their landing, and what differentiates this narrative of the Lehi from that of the Book of Mormon is apparently they land and they very quickly encounter ruins of a lost civilization. So it seems to me like the Gerardite narrative was probably going to play a bigger role in the lost 116 pages than it turned out to be. But I think that was the original intent, was that it was them finding this land and encountering a lost civilization that they don't know anything about, and then encountering ruins. And it kind of sounds similar to when we came here and encountered the mounds of this story of who are these people, this civilization. And so I think the idea is that he was going to tell the story of the civilization, using the Tower of Babel narrative, and then also using a more modern story about how the Jews got here.
That makes so much sense, because if you've got a biblical worldview, you've got to deal with the Tower of Babel scattering, which is the origin of all languages.
Yep.
So you would need in the Book of Mormon some explanation for the Tower of Babel, and then you would need some explanation for the 10 tribes and where they went.
Yeah.
And so why are there two peoples fundamentally in the Book of Mormon? It's to explain Tower of Babel and then the lost 10 tribes.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's actually, like they say, Joseph Smith may have bit off more than he could chew if he included all 10 lost tribes. So he doesn't, he has another tribe.
Remnants.
A remnant, if you will. But it's informed by the idea of there being a lost civilization, a lost tribe. He doesn't integrate the 10 lost tribes story into the Book of Mormon, but he follows a similar parallel. And that's because, honestly, there were so around this period of time in the 1820s, there was this thought that the earth was hollow. And there was this, as a matter of fact, I think it was Martin Van Buren wanted to send an expedition to the North Pole to go up there, because the idea was that there were these lost civilizations in the North Pole, right?
I was taught this.
Yeah. And
that the last 10 tribes were
exactly
like under the polar ice cap somewhere.
Right.
I was taught this in seminary.
Yeah, me too.
But people don't realize this was actually a widespread belief that had mainstream credibility back then. So the argument might be is that the the 10 lost tribes are up there in the hollow earth. This is another story about another group of Jews who made their way to North America. And this is also the story about how people from the Tower of Babel got here as well. So it takes all three into account.
Okay. So it was a more secular account. 116 pages gets created, and obviously Martin Harris loses them with his wife or whatever. Yeah. And then Joseph. So he could have just started over. Why didn't he just start over? Because you get the sense that he didn't just start over.
No, he didn't, because we have what's called the Mosiah priority, where he just started right off where he ended, the last 116 pages.
Why wouldn't he have started over?
Well,
I think he was thinking he could retrieve them. Right?
I think that was the initial thing, is that he would get them back.
Oh.
That was the big thing.
It's like, if we can just find him again, I can just continue.
Right.
Yeah.
So he just continues on with the narrative, right, where the last 116 pages are. And and I think that's so then we go from Mosiah all the way to the end of the Book of Mormon, and then goes back and fills in things differently. And we can even see the evolution of the text taking place from Mosiah on. And then if we know that was written first,
right,
then the other stuff in the Book of Mormon then becomes more religious, because the Book of Mormon at this point is heading in that direction. And so it's a different story. It's the same timeline, but it's become, I think the story as it's unfolding is becoming more and more about not only the explanation for the lost tribes and all that, but also answers another major question of the day is, how is it that the Lord would come and people wouldn't have the opportunity to hear the gospel message in lands that we weren't aware of?
Yeah.
So now I think as the story is evolving, Jesus coming to the Americas is something that it probably evolves into that. And then
maybe he didn't have that in mind when he started the book.
Right.
Nor did he have in mind Messiah, right?
Because
Messiah, I don't think Messiah mentions Jesus coming.
No, I think he talks about, his is about an old time, he's given a 19th century sermon about repentance, and John Hamer brought this up to me, not getting baptized.
Right.
So the baptism narrative comes in later in the Book of Mormon, right? So King Benjamin is not talking about being born again, repentance and baptism and all this kind of stuff. He's not doing the baptism part. So we can kind of see an evolution of the story, that not only do we have Jesus coming to the new world, but now as the story starts evolving, we now are starting to see the formation of a church, the idea of a church being founded. And so at the very end of the Book of Mormon, we have basically a rules of how do you start up a church and what are the signs of a true church. So
you think as he's coming to the end of the book, before he goes back and writes the beginning, maybe in his own mind, he's starting to think, I wonder if this could potentially spin off into a church. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I mean, John Hamer makes a very compelling case, and I tend to think that it all seems to fall in line with that, where that this evolution is happening. I don't know if he's writing the first 116 pages that he's thinking. I don't think he's thinking of starting a church, and I don't think he's thinking about Jesus coming to the New World.
Right.
I think that the story is leading up to that, and then I think as the story gets more and more complex, and he's writing, I think that's what happens. I think the story evolves into Jesus coming to the New World, and that we're going to start a church.
Learning that Messiah was written first really blew my mind, because it made a lot of sense on why Messiah doesn't really talk much about Jesus coming to America. But then when you go back to Nephi, Lehi is talking about Jesus going to come in 600 years after we left Jerusalem. And like all of a sudden, Lehi knows more about Jesus coming to America than people after him.
Then the Jews themselves, like David and Solomon, like Lehi knows more about Jesus than the actual Jews.
Yeah.
600 years before Jesus came.
And if the lost 160,
including his name and the ordinances and his mom's name and where he was born
and how could the lost 116 pages be a secular history if the whole entire reason for them fleeing from Jerusalem was because of the not only the impending destruction, but also Lehi is making very clear about Christ and his message and everything like that. I don't think you can write a secular history in the lost 116 pages if Lehi's doing all that stuff at the very beginning. Their whole motivation for coming there was all religious.
Right. So in other words, by the end of the book, it's getting super religious. So when you have to rewrite the 116 pages, it starts, maybe it's most religious because that's the religiosity is just increasing, right?
Yeah, I think and maybe all of this, the reason why the idea that we have a more secular account is that if the lost 116 pages are recovered, it would give an explanation as to why the small plates of Nephi tell a different story than the lost 116 pages do too. So it kind of gives you cover with that as well.
I mean, it is so, this is kind of the South Park, Martin Harris, dumb, 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 Lucy Harris, smart kind of thing, because like what a cover. Like, I can't recreate the 116 pages because then people with nefarious intent are going to, but God foresaw this. And so now I need to write a completely different 116 pages. Like, I mean, could there be a more transparent, like, admission, so to speak, that he wasn't translating? Because if he was translating, he could have just retranslated. If he was translating by the gifted power of God, the gifted power of God could have allowed him to create an identical 116 pages. No?
Right. That would have been obviously the greatest apologetic there, in favor of him having the power to translate. Like if he did word for word exact, but that's not what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So the fact that he has to invent this whole story about, well, God foresaw this and actually wanted me to create a whole different 116 pages kind of tells everything to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess the time period between him starting Mosiah and finishing the manuscript, how many days, months do you guys, is it 3 months or?
Well, he would have had Oliver Cowdery on board. Gerardo, do you know offhand?
Well, I guess
it
after,
was relatively short.
So after he loses the 116 pages,
he doesn't, he's not translating for a while.
So what do we make of that? Is that also a pretty obvious thing?
Well, yeah. Is he trying to think of the story where it's going to go?
He's got to rewrite.
Yeah, he's got to rewrite the beginning. Well, at this point, he may not be thinking he has to rewrite it. He may still have hope that he doesn't know if he's going to get those pages back or not. Right. So I think he's probably.
How much time off does he take? I mean, if he's translating by the gift and power of God, he could just continue. But then he says God took away his power.
Right. Well, he was being punished. Yeah, he was being punished. He had the plates taken away. I think at this point, Joseph is probably contemplating, do I want to continue with this?
Yeah.
Right. That's the most, I mean, in just secular naturalistic argument, it just seems like, okay, this was really hard to do. and Martin probably wasn't that good of a scribe.
Yeah.
And it's like, what the heck am I going to do? Because this took a lot of work to do. So I think
also, how am I going to make up for the 116 pages without being shown a fraud?
Right.
But then how's that going to change the things I still need to write?
Right.
If the story's already been written, and I need to write the remainder of the story, taking into account the changes that I now need to make to the beginning.
Right.
That's going to take some planning.
By the time he's going to write First Nephi and all that, he already has so much practice dictating and coming up with stories that it was pretty easy. I think it would be pretty easy to come up with a story that, now it's not going to be the Book of Lehi. Now it's going to be Nephi retelling all the story that his father told.
Especially if he's just grabbing Joseph Smith Sr.'s dream and throwing that in there along with his family biographical information and a huge chunk of Second Nephi. He's just going to, let's just add a bunch of Isaiah. You know what I mean? Like,
well, and the thing is too, is that we have maybe within the narrative of the Book of Mormon, he's able to weave into the story about finding other lost records. So maybe the initial story is that we just have this one set of lost records, and this is going to tell the complete story, right? But then in the narrative of the Book of Ether, we find the Book of Ether. So now we have found other records that were unknown to us, didn't know they existed. They make their way into the narrative, and then we're able then to weave those plates into the story of the Book of Mormon. So now you have a way of, there's other records. In addition to just the records that he would have had, he has in the story now about coming across other records. So that then
there's the small plates and the large plates and the sealed plates and the brass plates.
Right. So now
you need a lot of different sources.
Right. And we have the plates that they brought from Jerusalem and everything like that. But the idea is that they're writing a narrative. Now we've got to add in that other plates from other sources are going to come into the picture. So perhaps you could say that the Book of Ether was an explanation of coming across other plates that then now we can integrate to the history. Now we got the small plates in Nephi that we can then put into the story to then explain why this box that held just these records had the complete story.
You needed a bridger to kind of mash all that together.
Right. And Richard Bushman believes there were two sets of plates.
What the?
Yeah. So he does. I mean, so he's convinced of that. So that's where you're at. That there were two separate sets of plates now into the narrative, outside of the box.
That Joseph had two sets of plates he was dealing with.
He had access to two sets of plates.
And Bushman needs that to be true. Why?
Because again, the story as it's told, everything has to be on those plates that he found. The fact now this is where we have the story of like the Hall of Records gets into the narrative later on. But I think we can find that there's this idea now is starting to come out that not only is there just this box, but there was actually this repository of plates that was also done. So I think that has to be there. That repository has to be in the story at some point to explain getting the other plates so that they then could add in the beginning part of the last 116 pages.
So Joseph takes off how much time before he starts translating again with Oliver Cowdery?
I'm so terrible with dates and times and stuff like that. I'm trying to remember how long. Do you know?
I can't remember. He retrieves the plates in 27, and he doesn't get published until at least almost.
Yeah, it's completed in 29.
Yeah.
And then
it's at least like a winter and a spring.
Yeah, it's a period of time. I'm sorry, I'm going blank on that time period, but it is a period of time again because he needs time to. He needs
figure
time.
it out.
Yeah, figure it out. Yeah.
Grieve and mourn. Figure out the new story.
And find a better scribe.
Yeah. Okay, so the whole time Martin was involved, Martin's believing that he's translating plates, correct? in your view?
Yeah, I mean, Martin makes it very clear, and he talks later on. It was just what a time to be alive and to experience these things. It was just this remarkable period of time that he got to see these things happen. So I believe that, Martin definitely believed that Scripture was being produced. Absolutely. I also think that I think perhaps maybe Martin influences the narrative a little bit because of he was a congregant of Ethan Smith's congregation. And so maybe conversations that Joseph Smith has with Oliver make their way into the Book of Mormon. Joseph Smith had this ability to get other people's ideas and make them his own. He had the ability to do that, whether it was added in Scripture or stuff that he put in Doctrines and Covenants and stuff like that. So using other people's ideas, like Oliver's would have gotten from Ethan Smith, probably did find their way in there as well.
So Jenn's Googling. Jenn, what'd you find?
Yeah.
Okay.
On the church's website, it says there were 9 months in between the two.
So like between the time that the 116 pages got lost and he recommences with Oliver Cowdery, 9 months.
Yeah, 9 months is what they say.
Thanks, Jenn. Okay. Okay, so he takes that time off. You think Martin believed that Joseph had the gift of power and was really translating? When he
Are we talking about Oliver or Martin?
Martin.
Oh, Martin. Yeah, Martin definitely believed it.
When he recruits Oliver, in your view, was he recruiting a co-conspirator, or was he also able to convince Oliver that he had the power?
Yeah, I think Oliver's convinced. I think that. Yeah, I think Oliver was a believer, dude. Yeah, I think though, but this is like I was just mentioning, because we were kind of distracted here for a second, was that I think that Joseph has this ability to get other people's ideas. And so I think that maybe Oliver Cowdery sits under Ethan Smith as a pastor, and perhaps Oliver is telling him stories or telling him about the view of the Hebrews and giving him like ideas.
Yeah.
And
Mound Builder
so,
Myth, dark skin, light skin stuff.
right. Yeah. All this maybe this starts getting into the narrative, but again,
That would explain why then it later comes up on First Nephi and stuff, because I mean Oliver had already been started as a scribe.
yeah. So I think that, so he's probably weaving maybe some of Oliver's ideas into the narrative as they're just having conversations and talking. And that kind of makes its way into the Book of Mormon as well. And then that's how Ethan Smith's view of the Hebrews becomes maybe another influence on the Book of Mormon.
And Oliver's like, whoa, that stuff you're revealing, I believe that too. That's what I think.
Right.
It's like validating to Oliver that Joseph is basically feeding back to Oliver what Oliver told Joseph.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, that seems to be his modus operandi, is to restate things other people said back to them, and as confirmation that this is a true document, right? Or this is a true prophecy. I think he had an ability to do that by using their own words and just repackaging it back to them.
So the total time frame from Oliver beginning the translation to the full thing being, written, do we know how long that is?
She's going to look it up. I'm so terrible with the dates. Those are
I want to say it's like 100 days.
Yeah, it was a very relatively short period of time, and
that's the constrained time period.
Yeah,
that Quentin Cook and others just want to say, nope, period.
Yep.
Mic drop. Miraculous book. Yeah, because the Book of Mormon could never have been written in 100 days or whatever.
And that goes
85
days. Yeah.
And so how would you respond to that? That there's no way that book could have been written in 85 days.
Well, I think, first of all, like we talked about Dan Vogel, he makes a pretty compelling case that the actual amount of words that you would be typing or writing down every day,
like 6 pages.
Yeah, it wasn't that huge amount of that would have been done. And I think that Joseph he talked really fast. I think he kind of had this like manic ability to really tap into telling a story. So I think he's probably talking like this, and then Moroni did this, and they're talking, and they're almost trying to keep up as the story is just coming out of them very quickly, and they're writing these things down. And I think that in his mind, he is channeling something, that he is actually telling a story in some way. I think he's believing the story that he's been telling all along.
I mean, the fact that he starts with Mosiah shows that he had already written the book, if not notes somewhere in his head.
Yeah.
Because why would he start with Mosiah? Why would he start over? Like, to me, either an outline or a manuscript or a mental conceptualization of the book had already been completed, or he would have just started over.
Yeah, I honestly think it was all in his head.
Yeah.
I really think that's why because we don't really, like, people say, well, he had notes in the hat, and he did this and that. I don't think that was the case. I think it was all up here. I think he had this ability to really, I think it was just a genius.
And do we have a sense for whether he was more productive in terms of pages per day with Oliver than he was with Martin?
Yeah, I mean, Oliver was just so much better at, I mean, that's why he settled on Oliver, because Oliver was a better educated man. He was trained, and he probably was able to keep up better with Joseph. You know, it was probably frustrating for Joseph when he was dealing with Martin. There's a reason why he doesn't get Martin back into the picture, is because he found somebody.
I was taught because Martin was punished because
and
he lost the pages.
And he doesn't want him to lose those pages because Martin did lose them the first time, so I wouldn't trust him near him either.
Yeah. Okay, so with Oliver, within 90 days, he writes Mosiah to Moroni, and then he has to go back and do Nephi to Mosiah.
The first, like this. I think that he started off like at the second or third chapter of Mosiah, then goes back and then ends up finishing up from there. So yeah.
And there's pretty decent, is there some sort of word analysis that shows that things that, like, there's something wrong with the narrative in terms of what words or ideas show up in the first part of the book that clearly were written later, that somehow, do you even know what I'm asking? Like, when you do historical analysis, you can find clues of words that sometimes show that things aren't quite how they're being portrayed, kind of like historical criticism. And so I guess I'm asking, are there things appearing in Nephi to Mosiah that kind of shouldn't be there if it was written first? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually there was one, as you were talking, there was one rattling in my mind, and I'm trying to pull it out now out of the data banks, because there is an example of that something makes its way, shouldn't be there, right? At the beginning. And if I can think of it, I'll let you know, because right. I have encountered that seems to be
I wish I was more informed to be able to even ask an articulate question.
I just wish I could remember as much as I've read. I wish, I've forgotten a lot too, but there is definitely some stuff in there that seems to indicate that, I agree.
Okay. All right. So for you, the fact that it was written in 90 days or 80 days or whatever, for you for you, there's a secular explanation for that.
Yeah, I'm wearing my secular hat right now, and I would say that just the ability to do this was there. He seemed to, and it just proves that if we look at his later writings, he was articulate. He mostly did dictating. Some of the stuff. I guess what makes the Book of Mormon so interesting is that there really is some beautiful stuff in there and some pretty well-written things. Some of it's aping the Bible, some of it's original to the Book of Mormon. So let's give props there. I think that, though, if we look at other books that have been produced, like the Urantia book and other books that have been dictated, we know that just purely in a materialistic worldview, that the idea that somebody could have a ton of to be able to write a manuscript like this is perfectly within the realm of the natural, that it could be created that way.
Isn't it called automatic writing?
Yeah, automatic writing. Yeah. Yep. And he's not. Yeah, and sometimes it's. Some of the processes are different than others, but it does seem to indicate that he had some form of that was probably going on. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's important to mention William Davis's kind of theory. I don't want to spoil the book for you.
Yeah.
But if you look at, the introduction of each chapter, it's like this happens and then this happens and this happens and then this happens.
Heads.
William Davis wants to argue that those are like called the bones.
Yep.
That
The outline.
that pastors or people who gave sermons would kind of have a little outline structure that they would use to give multi-hour long sermons, that maybe he would have used that he would have acquired that practice when he was an exhorter.
Yep.
That he would have been able to have on a piece of paper, maybe even a piece of paper in the hat, that would have sort of outlined what we're going to be talking about for the next few hours. And he would have been able to see that. And then from those little bones, which actually appear in the headings of the chapter headings, he would have been able to use those as cues to kind of guide his story, his oration.
I've read a little bit of his book, and I've talked to Christopher Thomas about it because Christopher's good friends with him. And that seems to be like, it really makes sense because, I'm an extemporaneous speaker. So like I won in the Christian High School Awards, best extemporaneous speaker in the state of Indiana.
You did.
Yeah.
Of course you did.
So I just need just a little bit, just give me a little bit to work with, and I can weave something for you. And this is very similar to what they were doing in the frontier. That's why John Hamer says, we got examples of sermons being given. And so and it's the same process. So most of the time, these pastors might just have a couple things written down, right? And these would be cues for them. But because they know the Bible so well, and they're steeped in this whole world, that they just need a couple bullet points to talk for 20 minutes on just one of the, or an hour on it, and just extemporaneously. Yeah,
We're wearing you down.
Yeah, I think lunch is we need lunch soon. But that definitely that's how I would approach it, because that's how I did it. I just need a couple bullet points. I go to somebody, like, just give me the subject. Okay, this is the subject. Give me 5 minutes. I'll have a 15-minute speech for you. No problem. Could do that all day. Yeah. Without any thought.
And he would have had time between the sessions of translation to develop the next part of the story.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
he wasn't doing it all day long every day. Right.
Yeah. And I just think all he needed was a couple cues, and that's what he had to work on. And yeah, you can definitely see, I can see how it can be done. It's not implausible that's how it was done. I think that's actually one of the best new theories out there that kind of whittles down some, they say one of the strongest arguments against the Book of Mormon, there's like 5 or 7 different explanations how they came to be. And this perhaps whittles down some of those. And this will probably be the standard narrative against the faithful one that will probably stand the test of time, based on the little I've read on it and getting feedback from other people on it, that this will be Bill Davis's research, Visions in the Seer Stone, is going to be the counter narrative to the faithful one.
Yeah. So it's kind of like 10 years to develop the stories.
Yep.
Right? Mm-hmm. All the context that goes into it. King James Bible sitting there. He'll do a little planning, put his little outline together, go into the translation, tell the stories based on the outline that he probably brings in. Then they pause. Then he goes back, takes a rest, goes into the woods, whatever, plans, takes a nap, whatever, goes to bed, puts together his new outline, comes back the next day, does 6 more pages or whatever. Rinse and repeat over 90, 100 days, and you write the book. Is that? You dictate the book.
And this is the thing. I think the key thing is that he had thorough knowledge of the subject, just like those ministers had thorough knowledge of the Bible. And they were able to, and because they were in conversation with the text, Joseph Smith was in conversation with the story in his head. So all he had to do was just, because he knew the Bible, because he knew the world that he created so well, all he had to do was just, he's able to tap into it at any time. He just needed a couple of reminder points, and boom, 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 boom. I think it's a very, very likely explanation as to what happened there.
And then the final really important piece that I think Mormons forget is that the manuscript that he and Oliver produced is not in any way, almost not recognizable with compared to the version of the version of the state of the Book of Mormon that we read today. There's no chapters, There's no verses. The grammar's horrendous. The spelling's horrendous. And there's been even grammatical changes to make it sound less like a hick country bumpkin dictated it. And then I did a this, and then I did a that.
Yeah.
If you read the original, the remnants of the original transcript, it's not a high quality dictation or narrative. Am I right?
Yeah, that's one of the things that people who have been from the outside, who've done a textual analysis of the Book of Mormon, will tell you that it's not as impressive as it appears in its finished product that we have today. That it does sound like kind of like a rube dictating things. I've heard that from other people, and I've read some examples of it, and some have even said it almost sounds like a little bit of Appalachia gets its way into the Book of Mormon as well. So the document itself has been thoroughly cleaned up almost from the beginning, whether it was from the original manuscript, then it's cleaned up a little bit with the printer's manuscript, and then it gets cleaned up a little bit in 1837, gets cleaned up again in 1840, and then the church 1981 did some more changes. So we have this progressive changing of the Book of Mormon that it looks and sounds better,
More professional.
and more professional than the actual document that we have that Joseph Smith was dictating. So yeah, I mean, it becomes, like I said, I've had outsiders look at it. Most non-believing, all people who are not believers in the Book of Mormon, when they are engaging the original manuscript, are not all that impressed by it.
Right. But we're thinking about the 90 days with the version of the Book of Mormon that we have now,
Right.
that's had literally decades, if not a century and a half, of edits and refinement.
Yeah, and albeit so many will point out a lot of them were minor, and that's true, but it is definitely it sounds and looks different than the original manuscript.
Materially so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. For me, this is my last main question. I think everybody's tired and wanting to go get lunch. You mentioned that you believe there were plates in the room.
Yes.
Do you believe
At
that
times.
that Moroni delivered golden plates, and that golden plates that Joseph received from Moroni were in the room?
So, well, if we're just
Yes or no?
no, you can't do yes or no.
Why not?
Well, so if I'm speaking as atheist Steve, who doesn't believe in the supernatural, of course they weren't given to him by an angel, right? We know. Okay, of course not. It was, but.
But even Christian now, Steve, doesn't believe Moroni gave Joseph Smith golden plates, right?
Well, see, this is where we enter into the realm of faith claims and truth claims, and this is why. See, I look at it this way: Dan Vogel believed there were plates, and Richard Bushman believed that there were plates.
But Dan doesn't believe there were golden plates.
No, but this is my point. This is where faith comes into the story, or faith claims. This is where we have the natural world and the supernatural world. Kind of colliding, right? So I just say it's kind of like how you go about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, right? There's an empty tomb. Either he rose from the grave, or his body was stolen, right? Those could be the two main explanations. That's where faith comes in. Right.
So before you give the apologetic faithful version, give the secular version that would be Dan Vogel's explanation, or yours.
Okay. So, Dan Vogel believes that they were made from common tin, that they were constructed. And so that explains why the rustling and people felt them, and they felt like pages in the tin and stuff like that, but that's why they weren't allowed to look at them and stuff like that. So that would be Joseph Smith or somebody collaborated with him. They made plates from common tin. He kept them in the box. People couldn't see them. They could just hear them, and they could feel them through a frock, right? That's the basic.
Because conveniently he kept them covered, because otherwise we would have had to etch characters into these tin plates.
Right.
So just miraculously, he's told he has to put a cover over them, right?
Right.
So they could feel plates, but he wouldn't have to actually do the work to etch in the script, right? So
yeah, that would be, right. Obviously, that's the main thing. And then, of course, Bushman believes there are real plates delivered by an angel. Right. So I always tell people, this is where you're confronted with what's under that frock, something that was constructed by a man or something that was given to you by an angel. And then that's where faith comes into the story, right? Because one of the most interesting things that I found is that they found this Josiah Stole story that he actually saw the plates. And Josiah Stole has kind of been burned. I mean, he's a believer, but he did get, he kind of was kind of screwed over with this whole treasure digging thing and all this kind of stuff, right? And then if I'm Josiah Stole, I think this is kind of an apologetic thing, but if I'm Josiah Stole and I catch a glimpse of those plates and they look like common tin, he would recognize it right away and would have just walked away. So I always say that's why there's always this other narrative that I find fascinating, is that naturalistically they were probably homemade. But boy, Josiah Stole, he saw those plates. And you would think at that moment he would have recognized the con right there, and he didn't. And I just find that, and I find that very interesting. I just find that's one of those little apologetic pieces I find fascinating.
Wasn't Isaac Hale? Wait, Josiah Stole or Isaac Hale saw the plates?
Well, this was
Isaac Hales said he couldn't see the plates. So,
yeah, he couldn't.
So that's why he threw them out of the house. Pretty much said you can't.
Yeah,
here.
And Josiah Stole. What happened was that Joseph handed them to him through a window.
Yeah,
and they were covered, and he caught a glimpse of them, and he saw them.
But he's the one that always believed Joseph had the power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
So he was disposed to be a believer.
maybe. But if it was,
What do you mean maybe? He testified in that
I know
court.
that, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying, if it was just common tin, you would think at that point he would have had that realization that this is common tin. But right? That's
well,
all.
I mean, but faith is very resilient.
It
so
is very
like how many
resilient.
Jehovah's Witnesses, 1818 or 1820, Jesus is going to come. 1820 comes and goes. And then they just reinterpret their beliefs to another
and that could
date.
be,
Like belief is resilient.
yeah, it's very resilient, and that
If
could
belief
very
is
well.
anything, it's resilient.
Yeah, but I have to just say again, this was a naturalistic explanation, but I also have to say that I am a believer, so I also have to take into account that things as well. I can't just go full naturalistic on the Book of Mormon, and then say, and I'm a Christian and I got this book.
Well, we're coming to that.
Right. But so I do feel like, see, I'm one of those people that I look at it this way. I'm the kind of person that if somebody is being talked about in the room and that person isn't there to defend themselves, I'm the person that's inclined to step in and defend them.
Yeah.
And so I almost feel like sometimes that's just part of my nature.
I get it. But Steve Pynakker, today, where do you come down on the plates? Golden plates, tin plates, golden plates delivered by Moroni, tin plates fashioned by Joseph. Where do you come down?
Well, I guess I would have to lean towards them being tin plates, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's your external view.
Yeah. But again, but if a Mormon wants to go to me and say there's more evidence for the coming forth of the plates than there is for the resurrection of Jesus Christ, I have to at least take pause.
Sure. Okay. All right. So to summarize your overall assessment of the Book of Mormon.
I'm a big fan of it myself. I spoke at a Book of Mormon rally this past fall. So I think that there's a lot that can be taken out of it. And the reason why I'm a big fan of the Book of Mormon actually is because of my exercise of bridge building, which is for too long, for 200 years, evangelicals have been persecuting the Mormons and also and vice versa, right? And we're at a standstill. And part of I feel is my mission is to build bridges amongst groups. And to me, the Book of Mormon is a very Protestant, very Christian book. And so I kind of like a lot of what's in there. I agree with a lot of the doctrine that's in the Book of Mormon. So I think that the Book of Mormon is the one place that evangelicals and Mormons can have civil conversations. And I'm all about, in this time, it's not civil and nobody's talking to each other. And I think it's just important that if we can find some commonalities where we can have conversations, that's what I mean, to me, I think the mission of my channel is to show that you can talk to everybody, be fair, be kind to people. And I want to use the Book of Mormon to have conversations with Mormons and
About Jesus.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because I love Jesus.
Yeah. All right. I think we did it. Gerardo, any final questions or anything?
No.
Did we wear you out, Gerardo?
It was great.
I started getting lightheaded about a half hour ago. I was like, I need to eat something.
I could feel it, but I'm not, you know me, I'm just not quitting till
that's fine.
finish
I
the
love
job.
dude. I'm loving every minute of this. This is so awesome.
So Gerardo, you got everything you wanted from this?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was great.
Where do you come down, Gerardo?
What's my personal opinion?
Tin plates made by Joseph, gold plates delivered by an angel.
Well, I think it was Mark Elwood who introduced this idea to me that maybe there were different sets of plates at different times. So maybe by the time he shows them, or he's going to have the witnesses have them, he has a more refined, nicer looking plates. So I like that. I like that story.
And by the way, and Jenn, I'm about to ask you, but by the way, I've talked to Maxine Hanks, who's a believer. There's a progressive Mormon believer perspective that Joseph Smith did manufacture tin plates, but he did that because
people wouldn't believe.
He did that to help people believe what he still believed was true, which was that there were Nephite and Lamanite civilizations, that he was channeling revelation from God to produce the Book of Mormon, but that he needed to create plates and the story of the plates so that people would believe.
Yeah, in other words, it puts it on the people. I had to do this in order to tell this story because you needed tangible things. You couldn't take it on faith, so you needed a tangible thing. So it's almost like, I had to do it because the story is true. It had to be told, and I had to manufacture these plates as a result of that. And I can see that even being his motivation, that he knew that nobody would believe him unless he had something tangible.
Yeah. All right, Jenn, you get the final word. Did you already know all this stuff? Was this interesting?
No, I didn't know all of this. It was actually really interesting. I actually had to pause from getting emotional at one time.
Why?
Because I didn't know so much. And that's what it's been hard in the faith crisis, is like just not being told a lot. And so, so sometimes I had to pause for a second and be like, why? why do we not know any of this? Why is this not told to so many people? So sorry.
Because your faith crisis happened just 2 years ago, right?
Year and a half.
Year and a half.
Yeah, year and a half ago.
Do you remember a couple of the things said that were like bricks to your head? Like, whoa, I didn't know that. Do you remember any of the ones that really struck you as you wish you had known? Yeah.
That there was, that the word revelation was like used or restoration.
Yes.
Thank you. Restoration was used in common. I was taught like this is the only time, like this was the restoration. There was no other, restoration or even talk of that word or anything going on at that time. That one threw me. I think that's when I got emotional for a second, because it's just the stories and what's been told. I didn't know about someone else going to the hill with him and then, talking about these spectacles, and there's just so many things that are new to me, that I'm learning here. I felt like I had done a really good deep dive, when my faith first, when it all first shattered for me. But, I think, to be honest, it's because I have like this hope inside of me still that like something was like good or something was true or something about the whole story. And I keep like having this hope that maybe there's something to hold on to. And then I just keep learning thing after thing after thing that the church has like kept from people within the church, or like as they are learning about the church, like converts. And I just think, why? Like they can make, if they chose to, they could make something so beautiful out of it. like out of the church, but they're just choosing not to. They're just choosing to continue to like not tell the truth and lie and twist things and you know, put money in places they shouldn't be instead of helping people and building this corporation. And I think if they took a moment and like brought it back to maybe Joseph just having being connected to God and writing this story and what can we pull from it that's beautiful, and turning the whole narrative into something that can actually be good on this earth, then how amazing is that? Like, how great is that? But that's not what they're choosing to do. And I think it just kind of hurts me every time I learn something new. It just kind of hurts like this, what I feel like is like the soul in me. And I wish that they could maybe just be more like Jesus.
Yeah. Wow.
So sorry, that was a Jenn.
No apologies.
Jenn tangent for a second. They're
Jenn
Mormon
brings
story,
the truth.
Yeah.
Mormon story listeners.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
Jenn bringing the heart and the truth.
This is when it becomes real, right? You know, I used to think back in the day, I'd be like, well, you guys were singing praise to the man. I was reading about the stone in the hat and you had no idea, you know? And so that's the conundrum I'm in, because I often forget that people don't know what I know. And part of me feels really bad for you, right? I mean, because this is when it becomes too real for me. It's real. This is real. And I just want to let you know that, you know, as a Christian, you know, I just wanted to reach out to you and just let you know that, you know, Jesus is real and he loves you. And I just want you to think and contemplate on him. I'm not here to proselytize, but I just want you to consider Jesus and follow, just look his direction, and consider, if you're looking for good, if you're looking for beautiful, if you're looking for purpose, then look to Jesus. And I think he can get you through this.
Your
Thank you. I
response,
appreciate
Jenn?
your words. I appreciate your words. And that I feel like is what I'm doing right now in my life. I'm just picking up each piece one at a time and not trying to be hurried about it and not trying to, you know, listen to someone else tell me what I should do and what I should believe and anything like that. I'm just taking each piece and going within to see what feels right for me.
Yeah, do you do you, and you follow the path that you need to feel, and don't even take what I told you to do, just to consider the words.
Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate you and what you're saying.
Thank you.
Oh, and you know, as someone who was never raised Mormon, let me tell you a little bit more about Mormonism, Steve Pynakker. It's a joke. We just had a master class from someone who's never been Mormon, who knows more about Mormonism than all of us will ever know. So thank you, Steve Pynakker.
Wow.
That was beautiful. That was powerful. Someone's got to write a book on how the Book of Mormon was created, a secular view. Has anyone ever done that? It's so weird that we don't have at least a few books, because even you were rusty on some of the dates, or some of the timelines, or that thing about words appearing in the earlier part of the book that shouldn't be there. Somebody should write this book, don't you think?
Yeah, well, I think, like you said, Bill Davis is kind of leading us in that direction. You know, that
you think he might be working on that book?
Well, I think that book will be where all the future scholarship will come from.
What he wrote.
What he wrote, the visions in the series.
What I'm tired of though is like all glory be to Jeremy Runnels, you know what I mean? But like nobody's writing the books that really provide the explanations that an average Mormon like me or Jenn could just read and really get the facts. It's a bunch of scholarly stuff that's way too technical and way too deep for anyone to understand, or super apologetic stuff that has no credibility.
Or it's anti-Mormon.
Or it's anti-Mormon.
Yeah.
But nobody is just going, here's the evidence. Here's how the Book of Mormon was likely written based on the best scholarship we have. here are the problems with the anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, from anachronisms start to finish in the Book of Mormon. Here's just a really good explanation of the Book of Abraham and the problems with it. You know what I mean? Nobody's writing those books. Why is no one writing those books?
Well, I mean, I guess.
How about this? Here are the problems with Joseph Smith's polygamy. Like we asked Sandra Tanner, right? Yeah. What book should I read? And she's like, well, there's Todd Compton, but that's just a bunch of narratives of all the different wives. And then there's George Smith. And she's like, you got to read like 3 or 4 different other books to kind of like, why isn't there a book on like Joseph Smith's polygamy, start to finish, and why it was a problem? You know what I mean? Nobody's written that book.
Maybe Stephen should do that. Because I did appreciate how you were like, here's the story, here's what I believe, but here's maybe another interpretation that could also go with all of the facts, that were about that time period. Like someone needs to write just a book that has those for each time period kind of Mormonism.
Yeah. I wish there was a timeline, That's what I always wanted.
Because there is a timeline. So there have been versions of what I'm talking about. So Jeremy Reynolds did it, but before him, there was Mormon Think. Let's add these to the show notes. So there's Mormon Think, which was really one of the first to try and do this. And it's an amazing resource that almost no one talks about now. There's also Letter to My Wife or Letter from My Wife, which is amazing. And also my friend Mike Brown wrote a bunch of essays on all the truth claims, and you can go to MormonStories.org and you can go to the truth claims section and you can read really thoughtful essays on all these different topics. And Gerardo, it includes a timeline.
Yeah.
Did you know that there's a really good timeline?
I forgot about it and I just pulled it up. I remembered.
And let's include that in the show notes as well, the timeline that my friend Mike Brown put together. But the problem is, like, even you, Gerardo, who works with me, forgot that the timeline even exists. There needs to be like a book or like 5 books or 10 books.
Like a series.
That's like all the major Mormon truth claims covered in a book that's credible, that's non-anti-Mormon, that's not polemics, that's really based on the history, but that lays out the facts and lays out reasonable explanations for all the different things and why they're problems. And if they want to end with what the faithful response is and then the problems with the faithful response, that's what Mormon Think was trying to do. But we don't have it in like book form or tangible form so that it can really be propagated. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think that, what I think is important, like what Christopher Thomas did with his book, was that he, at the very end of it, this is the explanation that Joseph Smith gave of the coming forth. So it's the earliest document, one of the earliest documents of Joseph Smith talking about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. That's a chapter. And then Christopher Thomas writes the standard narrative that counteracts it. So you could have that as part of all these books so that you can include the faithful and include the counter narrative as part of it, have the timeline and all that stuff in there. I think that would be a valuable resource. I guess the question is like, who's going to fund it? Who's the audience for? Are faithful Mormons interested in it? And are Christians interested in it? Who's going to be the audience that's going to read these books? But I think that would be a valuable resource. Maybe even a website that even does something like that, more of that. But yeah, I think there needs to be more of that because I have tons of books, but it's all this information you got to glean from all these different places. It would be nice just to have kind of like a standard timeline that addresses all these things. I agree with you.
Yeah, to Jenn's point, right? People are giving decades of their lives, 10% of their income, making major life decisions about education, about careers, about number of children to have, about who to marry, about when to marry.
When to have children.
What's that?
When to have children or education.
Yeah. And they deserve to have the basic facts in an accessible, credible way. And we still haven't figured out how to deliver that. Mormon Think does a good job. Letter from My Wife, CES letter, the Truth Claims essays on Mormon Stories. All those get there, but we haven't figured out how to. CES letter has done better than anyone else to deliver it en masse, but it covers a pretty small subset of the things people kind of really need to know. Right?
Yeah. It's been probably, how long has the CES letter been out for now?
I think it came out around 2014.
Okay, so probably the last time I read the CES letter was around 2014 or so. So I mean, and there's some criticisms that people make of the CES letter that I think are valid, but overall, I think it tells a pretty compelling story. And for a lot of people, it's like the first time they've ever encountered these facts. And then, of course, that brought upon the Gospel Topics essays and all that kind of stuff too. Yeah, there's just,
No, the Gospel Topics essays actually
before.
Yeah, that was more
that.
Hans Mattson and
it's like it
lots
was
of other
2010,
things.
2012 is when they came out, right?
Yeah.
Right around there. Yeah.
Well, no.
2013.
No. So what happened, there's a whole Mormon Stories episodes about this, but it's like Rough Stone Rolling comes out, Mormon Stories comes out, Mormon Think comes out, Hans Mattson loses his faith around 2000, 2010-ish. And then the Swedish Rescue happens, and then Marlon Jensen gets involved, and I get involved, Greg Prince gets involved, Travis Stratford gets involved, and then Marlon Jensen uses all of this to convince their brethren to do the Gospel Topics essays. And then, Jeremy Reynolds' CES letter comes out after the Gospel Topics essays had already started coming out.
Yeah, right.
And it's just but Jeremy's a legend, and CES letter is legendary.
Yeah,
too.
That's had quite an impact. I mean, the fact is that the church has to have a better narrative because they're losing people because they're getting exposed to the CES letter. And I think, like I go on my show all the time. I said, it's your birthright to know your history. That's your birthright. And it's the birthright for Christians to know their history. See, we're often given a distorted view of things as well. We have a whitewashed history too. We don't know a lot of the facts about the Bible or how some of the scholarship and some of the issues where things are kept from us as well, especially from a more conservative evangelical world. So I can kind of relate. We don't have quite the obstacles you guys have, right? Because we have a lot more freedom in our movement to jump around, and we don't have to belong to just this church. So we have a lot more freedom, but there's when it comes to religion, like most Muslims don't know really a whole lot about the history of their religion. Most Christians don't. So that's one of the great faults of religion, is that it's
or features depending on your perspective.
Yeah. See, that to me is
because regardless of whatever religion you're in charge of, you don't want your members thinking too much about it. You don't want your members learning too much about it, regardless of the religion.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and that's
thinking and learning gets you into trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Now, that's why I'm a product of the Protestant Reformation, and it did a lot of great for civilization. It did a lot of good things, and it also did light the spark for the Enlightenment and the Republic of the United States, and a lot of liberal ideas came out of it, and a lot of it was based on some basic Christian concepts and ideas. So within the content of Christianity, there is a roadmap that gives us our birthright as human beings, as fellow image bearers, to be our own people, to learn and not allow institutions to be our mediator, but you have that direct, you engage the text on your own way, and you engage Jesus on your own means, and you have total freedom in Christ and liberty to do such a thing. That's my answer to all of that, because I don't believe in organized religion. I'm not a big fan of religion in general. I think that's the weakness of it. Most religion is man-made. All religion's man-made, right? All religion's man-made.
And isn't it wonderful that an evangelical has been sent to us, the Mormon people, to teach us about our own birthright? And that's you, Stephen Pynakker, with Mormon Book Reviews.
Yeah, John, I think it's important. You have a right. You have an absolute right to know these things.
And I'll just add, and I don't mean to rub salt in the wound, but yes, it's our birthright to know our religion. Yes, Jenn, you should have been told this. I should have been told this. Gerardo should have been told this. Viewers and listeners should have been told this. It is fundamentally immoral. Now that the church knows all about Joseph's polygamy, now that the church knows all about the problems with the historical Book of Mormon, it's fundamentally immoral for the church to continue to withhold this important contextual information so that people can understand the problems with the church's truth claims. And it's fundamentally immoral for the church to fund apologists that weave and spin arguments to mislead and deceive people such that they won't learn or think about the historical problems with the church's truth claims. And the church is still in full deception mode today, even with the book Saints, even with the Gospel Topics essays. Those aren't attempts, good faith attempts to genuinely inform members. They're attempts to mislead and deceive and to whitewash and to prevent Mormons from learning their true history and from considering the problems with the churches, the credible problems with the church's truth claims. Is that too brutal? Did I go too far?
Well, I mean, that's John DeLynn being John DeLynn there, right? So,
wait a minute. Isn't that just objective what I just said? Objectively true?
No,
Gerardo, is that not objectively true?
Well, I think it is my opinion. I mean, we were just here reviewing what Kate Holbrook word by word was saying, on a podcast, and the arguments she would use to
justify.
Yeah, take William Clayton's document, but then say we can't rely on his story about it because it's inconvenient, and saying that she's not whitewashing, but then noticing over and over again how every time she tells a story about a woman practicing polygamy in Joseph Smith's time, like she was leaving so many details out that were really important to the story. So
that details that she knows.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's part of the reason why we had a Protestant Reformation was that the Catholic Church wasn't telling people their birthright, wasn't telling people the whole story. And I think this is just endemic to all religions. They all end up going in that direction. So I think that it's not unique to Mormonism, that this is part of the issue with religion in general. And so to me, when I criticize the church, I want to also show that I criticize all churches for doing very similar things as well.
Right.
Yeah, and it's even hard to hear like the date. I didn't know the date when the essays came out because now being out of the church, speaking to all of my family and friends who are still believing members, there was only one person that even knew about the essays.
Now,
like in 2022.
Know about the essays.
Yeah, that even know about them or the CES letter. So
and they've been around 8 years.
Yeah. So the church says, that, we put them out onto our website or whatever, but you have to dig to find those essays. And they're not something that are just spoken about or told to people. And just reading the essays when I first was questioning, I didn't know things in them. And so they weren't just given out, they weren't told to people. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jenn and Gerardo. And Stephen, I received a revelation. You received a revelation. You want to hear my revelation?
Yes, sir.
That Mormon Book Reviews is supposed to be renamed Mormon Reformation.
Well, they already had our Mormon Reformation with Brigham Young in the 1850s. So.
The real Mormon Reformation.
I have to get rebaptized like Brigham Young did. So, well, thank you.
You
sir.
said Mormonism needs a reformation. Maybe you're the reformer.
Maybe I nailed 95 theses to the door today, right?
All right, Stephen Pynakker, thank you so much. And for all the viewers and listeners, you can go to YouTube and check out Mormon Book Reviews. You can go to mormonbookreviews.com. You can go to Apple Podcast or Spotify, wherever you consume your podcasts. Stephen does important work. And Stephen, we can't thank you enough. And we're not even done. We're just like,
this is fun.
We're just like 4 or 5 hours into a full 2-day experience. I'm curious to see if we're going to do more today, if we're all just too wiped, and we're going to come back and try and finish tomorrow.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I'm feeling good.
However the spirit dictates.
Yeah.
All right.
I follow the spirit, man. Let's do it.
All right. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gerardo.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jenn.
Thanks, everyone.
And we'll see you all. Don't go away. Come right back for part 3 and 4 and 5 with Stephen Pynakker here on Mormon Stories. Thanks, everybody.